The heavy oak doors of Lumiere parted. Atlanta's premier dining destination hummed with the quiet, low-pitched murmur of old money and new power. I stepped inside, handing my coat to the hostess, who gave me a subtle, knowing nod. I wore a simple, tailored black dress devoid of flashy logos. I made my way to the private dining room in the back, reserved weeks in advance under my mother Beatrice's name. It was her 60th birthday. As I pushed open the frosted glass door, the immediate barrage of insults began exactly as I had predicted. "Look who decided to show up," Chloe announced. My younger sister sat at the head of the table, dripping in diamonds that I knew for a fact were purchased on credit. She looked me up and down, her lips curling into a practiced sneer. "I am honestly shocked they let you pass the front door in that outfit. Did you come straight from washing dishes at whatever diner you are working at now?" Preston, her husband, sat beside her. He swirled a glass of amber liquid that cost more than most people made in a day. He offered a condescending chuckle, adjusting the cuffs of his blazer. "I am just amazed she managed to afford the valet parking out front. I saw her hand the kid a 20. That is probably half her daily tips gone right there." I pulled out my chair and sat down, smoothing my napkin across my lap. I did not offer a defense. I did not raise my voice. I simply poured myself a glass of sparkling water and let their hostility fill the room. My mother Beatrice sat across from me, adjusting her posture to ensure everyone in the adjacent semi-private alcoves could hear her. "Do not tease your sister Chloe," Beatrice said, using a tone that was anything but reprimanding. "It is not her fault she lacks ambition. We tried to get her into corporate finance. We tried to set her up with a respectable career, but she insisted on playing with pots and pans. Now she is 35 years old and still struggling in a kitchen." "It is just embarrassing," Chloe added, leaning into Preston. "Preston just secured another round of funding for his tech startup. He is building an empire. Meanwhile, we have to worry if you can even afford to keep the lights on in your apartment. You really bring down the family brand." Preston puffed out his chest, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "It takes a certain mindset to succeed in this world. A winner's mindset. Not everyone has it. No offense, Maya, but you chose the service industry. You chose to be the help. You cannot expect to sit at the big table when you refuse to play the big game." I took a slow sip of my water. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Preston's tech startup was a glorified networking app that had hemorrhaged money for 2 years. Chloe's lifestyle was funded entirely by credit cards and Beatrice's relentless enabling. They sat in a restaurant where reservations required a 6-month wait, acting like royalty while looking down on the very person who held the keys to the castle. I stayed perfectly silent, allowing them to build their towering monument of arrogance. For the next 2 hours, I endured a masterclass in gluttony and psychological abuse. Preston and Chloe treated the waitstaff with absolute disdain, snapping their fingers for refills and demanding menu modifications that were highly inappropriate for a Michelin-starred establishment. They ordered with reckless abandon. 3 bottles of vintage champagne at $500 each, 2 orders of the Wagyu tomahawk steak, seared foie gras, imported white truffles shaved generously over handmade pasta. Every time a new dish arrived, Chloe made a point to look at me with pity. "You better eat up, Maya," Chloe said, slicing into her steak. "I know you do not get to eat like this normally. Try not to embarrass us by asking for a doggy bag." Beatrice nodded vigorously, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. "It really is a shame. Look at your sister Maya. She married a brilliant man. They have status, they have respect, and you sit there chewing your food looking like a lost cause." I invited the Johnsons to this dinner, but I specifically told them to come late so they would not have to see how far you have fallen behind. I sliced my fish, maintaining perfect eye contact with my mother. "I appreciate your concern for my dietary habits." Preston scoffed, pouring himself another glass of champagne. "Someone has to be concerned. You are 35. You have no assets. You have no real career. You are just coasting through life, hoping the rest of us do not notice the failure." The plates were eventually cleared. The dessert course came and went in a flurry of spun sugar and edible gold leaf. I watched the specific micro-expressions on Preston's face when the waiter finally approached the table holding the sleek black leather billfold. Preston reached out with practiced authority, intercepting the bill from the waiter's hand. He opened it, glanced at the total, and let out a sharp whistle. He did not reach for his wallet. Instead, he tossed the leather folder directly across the table. It slid over the white linen and stopped right against my water glass. $4,200, Preston announced, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. Not bad for a Tuesday. I looked down at the receipt, then up at my sister. Why is this in front of me? Chloe smiled, a vicious, triumphant expression that she had been practicing since we were teenagers. Because you are paying for it, Maya. Consider it your tax for being a lifelong disappointment. We tolerate your presence at these family events. We let you sit here and eat this incredible food. Covering the bill is the absolute least you can do to compensate for the embarrassment you caused this family. Beatrice clapped her hands together in agreement, her voice carrying over the ambient noise of the restaurant. Exactly right. You owe us, Maya. We gave you everything. We provided the foundation for your life, and you threw it all away to be a nobody. You have never contributed a single respectable thing to the Bennett family name. Pay the bill. It is your mother's birthday, and I will not tolerate your usual stinginess. Preston smirked, picking his teeth with a toothpick. Come on, Maya. Empty out that little checking account of yours. Or do you need to call your landlord and ask for an extension on your rent this month? The audacity was breathtaking. They had orchestrated this entire evening not to celebrate Beatrice, but to trap me in a financial humiliation. They genuinely believed they could force me to empty my supposed meager savings just to appease their egos. I placed my hands flat on the table, looking at the three of them. I did not argue. I did not defend my finances. I simply waited for the trap to spring shut on them. The door to the kitchen swung open. The noise of the busy service line briefly spilled into the dining area before cutting off. Julian, the executive chef, walked out into the dining room. Julian was a culinary prodigy, an African-American chef I had personally poached from a rival establishment in New York. He wore his pristine white chef coat, holding a small silver tray. He walked straight toward our table. Chloe immediately sat up straighter, adjusting her diamond necklace. "Oh, look!" she whispered loudly. "The chef is coming to greet us. Preston must have told them who he is." Preston puffed out his chest, preparing to accept the deference he felt he was owed. He raised a hand ready to wave Julian over, but Julian did not look at Preston. He did not even glance at Chloe or Beatrice. He bypassed their side of the table entirely and stopped directly beside my chair. He bowed his head slightly, extending the silver tray which held a single perfectly crafted amuse-bouche that was not on the menu. "Ms. Bennett," Julian said, his voice respectful and professional, "I wanted to present this personally. The new seasonal menu launches tomorrow. The white truffles from Alba just arrived this morning. Is everything perfect?" I looked at the dish, noting the precise plating. "The sear on the wagyu was slightly uneven, Julian, and the champagne inventory needs to be restocked. Otherwise, the service was flawless. Thank you." "Understood completely, Ms. Bennett. I will address the line immediately." Julian bowed again and walked back toward the kitchen without giving my family a second glance. The silence at the table was absolute. The smug expressions had completely vanished from Chloe and Preston's faces, replaced by profound confusion. Beatrice stared at me, her jaw slightly slack. "What on earth was that?" Chloe demanded, her voice shrill, slicing through the quiet room. "Why is the executive chef of Lumiere talking to you like you are his boss? Why did he ignore Preston?" I reached for my napkin, folding it neatly beside my plate. I looked directly into Chloe's eyes. "Because he works for me, Chloe. I sign his paychecks." Preston let out a loud, barking laugh, slamming his hand on the table. "You sign his paychecks? Are you insane? You work in a kitchen, Maya. You do not own a place like this. Lumiere is a multi-million-dollar establishment. Stop making up pathetic lies to save face." "I do not work in a kitchen, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a low, deadly register. "I own the kitchen. I own the dining room. I own the building." Beatrice shook her head aggressively, refusing to accept reality. "That is a lie. You are a line cook. You have always been a failure. You do not own anything." I did not raise my voice. I simply raised my hand, making a subtle gesture toward the front of the house. Marcus, the maitre d', who had been watching the table closely, stepped forward immediately. He carried a sleek black leather folder. He walked to the table and placed it gently in front of Beatrice, opening it to reveal the corporate incorporation documents and the business license for Lumiere. "As requested, Miss Bennet," Marcus said to me before stepping back to his post. Beatrice stared at the documents. The name Maya Bennet was printed clearly at the top, listed as the sole proprietor and chief executive officer of the hospitality group that owned Lumiere. Chloe snatched the paper from her mother's hands, her eyes darting back and forth across the legal text. Her face drained of all color. The diamond necklace suddenly looked heavy around her neck. Preston stared at the paper, his arrogant smirk melting into a mask of pure shock. The reality crashed down on them. The sister they had spent the entire evening mocking, the woman they had planned to financially humiliate, was the master of the house. The psychological shift was instantaneous and nauseating. I watched their brains recalibrate, trying to process the destruction of their worldview. There was no apology. There was no moment of remorse for the vile things they had said over the past 2 hours. The toxicity simply mutated, taking on a new parasitic form. Beatrice recovered first. She pushed the documents aside and plastered on a smile so artificial it made my skin crawl. "Well," Beatrice announced, her voice bright and commanding, "this is wonderful news. You own this restaurant. That means this entire meal is complimentary. We are family after all. You certainly will not be charging your own mother on her birthday." Chloe immediately agreed, sliding the $4,000 billfold back across the table toward me. "Obviously she is paying for it, Mom. She is rich. She has been hiding all this money from us while we were worried about her. She owes us a free meal. Honestly, Maya, you should be ashamed of yourself for letting us think you were struggling. You embarrassed us by keeping this a secret." Preston leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His previous disdain was completely erased, replaced by the aggressive entitlement of an opportunist who had just spotted an open vault. "This is actually perfect timing, Maya. You own a hospitality group. That means you need high-level executive management. My tech venture has been wrapping up recently. I am looking for my next big project. You need to bring me on as your chief financial officer." I stared at him, letting the audacity of his demand hang in the air. "You want me to hire you as my CFO? 10 minutes ago you were telling me I belonged in the dish pit." Preston waved his hand dismissively. "That was just family banter. Do not be overly sensitive. Business is business. I have the corporate mindset you lack. I can take this restaurant and franchise it. I expect a starting salary of $300,000 and a 10% equity stake. We keep the wealth in the family. It is the right thing to do." "The right thing to do," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You sit at my table, insult my clothes, mock my career demand, I empty my bank account to pay for your gluttony, and now you expect me to hand you my company." Beatrice slammed her hand on the table, her eyes flashing with renewed anger. "He is your brother-in-law, Maya. He is family. You will give him the job. You owe this family your success. You would be nothing without the foundation we gave you. We raised you. We provided for you. You will support Preston and Chloe because that is your obligation." "My obligation?" I said softly, leaning forward. The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. I locked eyes with Beatrice, refusing to blink. "You want to talk about the foundation you gave me? You want to talk about family obligations? Are we really going to do this, Beatrice? Are we going to talk about the culinary scholarship you stole from me 15 years ago?" The blood completely vanished from Beatrice's face. Chloe froze, her hand hovering over her wine glass. Preston looked confused, his eyes darting between his wife and his mother-in-law. I sat perfectly still, holding all the power, waiting for the explosion that was about to level their entire lives. The silence that followed my question was absolute and suffocating. Beatrice stared at me as all the blood rushed out of her face, leaving her looking gray and suddenly very old. Chloe froze, with her hand hovering over her crystal wine glass. Preston looked back and forth between his wife and his mother-in-law, completely lost. He had married into this family believing they were wealthy and flawless. He knew nothing about the skeletons buried in our closet. What scholarship? Preston asked, his arrogant tone faltering for the first time all evening. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my mother. The $60,000 grant I won from the Culinary Institute. I said, my voice perfectly level. The one that required a parental endorsement because I was barely 18 years old. You forged my signature, Beatrice. You took the check from the mail and you cashed it into a joint account I could not legally access. Beatrice recovered her shock, quickly replacing it with defensive fury. She slammed her hand down onto the white linen tablecloth, rattling the expensive silverware. I kept a roof over your head, Maya, she yelled. You were living under my roof, eating my food. That money was compensation for the sacrifices I made raising you alone. You owed me for your childhood. I let out a harsh, dry laugh. Sacrifices, I repeated. You mean the bare minimum legal requirements of keeping a child alive. I worked 2 jobs in high school just to pay for my own clothes and my own bus fare. That scholarship was my ticket out of poverty. It was my entire future, and you stole it to maintain your socialite facade. Chloe immediately jumped in to defend our mother, her diamond earrings sparkling under the chandelier light. You are so ungrateful, Maya, Chloe sneered. Mom used that money for household survival. We were struggling to keep up appearances in our neighborhood. She did what she had to do for the family. Household survival. Chloe, I asked, is that what we are calling it now? I reached down into my designer leather tote bag and pulled out my tablet. I opened a heavily encrypted file I had saved for over a decade. I slid the tablet across the table right over the expensive linen, stopping it directly in front of my sister. I hired a forensic accountant 3 years ago when I started expanding my hospitality group, I explained. I needed to make sure my credit history was spotless because of the financial mess Beatrice left in my name. And do you know what my accounting team found? Chloe looked down at the glowing screen. Her eyes widened and her breath hitched. These are the bank statements from that joint account, I said, my voice echoing off the private dining room walls. I want you to read the exact dates the scholarship funds were depleted. $10,000 wired to a luxury bridal boutique in Buckhead. $15,000 to a premium floral designer, $20,000 for a non-refundable deposit at the country club venue. You did not use my future for household survival, Beatrice. You used it to pay for Chloe's lavish first wedding, the one to that chiropractor who divorced her 2 years later. Chloe's face flushed a deep, angry red. She pushed the tablet away as if it burned her. I deserved a beautiful wedding, Chloe shouted, her voice shrill and defensive. You were just going to waste that money learning how to chop onions. You were a nobody. I was marrying into a respectable family. I used my own 2 hands to build a multi-million-dollar empire. Chloe, I replied coldly. You used my stolen money to buy a party for a marriage that failed before the wedding cake went stale. Preston, seeing his wife being humiliated and realizing the family wealth he thought he married into was a complete fabrication, decided to step in. His massive ego could not handle losing control of the room. Listen to me, you arrogant line cook, Preston said, leaning aggressively across the table, his face twisting into something ugly and threatening. You think you hold all the cards because you own one fancy restaurant. You have no idea how the real world works. Enlighten me, Preston, I said, raising a single eyebrow. My family has deep ties with the city council, Preston threatened, pointing a finger directly at my face. We have friends on the health board and the zoning commission. Do you know how easy it is to shut down a restaurant in this city? One anonymous tip about a severe rat infestation. One sudden surprise inspection that magically finds critical health code violations. One phone call to the liquor board and your license is revoked permanently. You will be bankrupt and locked out of this building in a month. Preston smiled a predatory, vicious grin, thinking he had me trapped. Here is how this is going to work, Maya. You are going to sign over a 30% ownership stake in this hospitality group to Chloe. You are going to put me on the board of directors with a full executive salary. If you do that, I will make sure your little kitchen stays open. If you refuse, I will personally ensure this building is condemned, and you are completely ruined. Beatrice nodded vigorously, totally ignoring the fact that her son-in-law had just attempted blatant corporate extortion. Listen to him, Maya, Beatrice demanded. He knows what he is talking about. He is a brilliant businessman. This is how you protect the family. You share the wealth or you lose everything. I did not panic. I did not raise my voice. I did not show a single ounce of fear. I simply signaled the head of my private security detail who was standing silently by the door. Then I reached back into my bag. You want to talk about ruin, Preston? I asked smoothly. Let us talk about absolute ruin. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder and dropped it onto the table. It landed with a loud thud right next to the tablet. What is this? Preston asked, his confident smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second. That is a comprehensive background check and a complete financial dossier, I said, leaning back in my chair. When you demanded a job as my chief financial officer earlier tonight, I remembered that my private security team runs deep vetting on anyone who tries to solicit employment from me or my partners. They finished your profile last week. Preston stared at the folder but did not touch it. You have no right to look into my private affairs. He stammered, his voice losing its aggressive edge. I have every right when you sit at my table and try to extort me, I replied. Let us look at the highlights, shall we? Your tech startup did not just fold, Preston. It was actively investigated for the gross misappropriation of investor funds. You are currently $800,000 in debt to a private offshore lender. A lender who is known for not being very forgiving when monthly payments are missed. Chloe gasped, grabbing Preston's arm tightly. Preston, what is she talking about? Chloe demanded, her voice trembling. You told me the company was just pivoting to a new global market. You said we were going to buy a vacation home in Miami next year. Shut up, Chloe Preston hissed, sweating profusely now. Oh, it gets so much better, I said, leaning in closer to ensure they heard every single word. You needed massive capital to keep those offshore collectors at bay. But your credit is completely destroyed and no legitimate bank would touch you. So you needed collateral for a new loan. Collateral you absolutely did not have. I turned my gaze slowly, purposefully to my mother. Tell me, Beatrice, did you actually read the legal documents Preston asked you to sign last October? The ones he promised were just character references for his new business venture. Beatrice's eyes darted wildly around the room. What documents? She asked, her voice shaking with sudden terror. He just needed a co-signer for a small temporary bridge loan. He said it was just a minor formality. It was not a bridge loan, Beatrice, I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. Preston used your home, the house you have lived in for 30 years. He used it as fraudulent collateral for an $800,000 loan, and because he has completely defaulted on the payments, the bank is officially initiating the foreclosure process. You are going to lose your house, Beatrice. You are going to be on the street because of the golden child's husband. The color drained completely from Beatrice's face. She looked like she had been physically struck by a freight train. She turned slowly to look at Preston, her hands shaking violently. Is this true? She whispered. Did you put my house up for collateral? Preston stammers, backing his chair away from her. I was going to pay it back, Beatrice. I swear. I just needed a little more time to secure the next round of funding. It was a temporary measure to protect the family. Beatrice erupted. The pristine, elegant facade she had maintained for 6 decades shattered completely. She screamed at Preston, calling him a fraud, a thief, and a parasite. Chloe started crying hysterically, pulling at Preston's jacket, demanding to know how they were going to maintain their luxury lifestyle without his income. The toxic alliance they had formed against me just moments ago crumbled into absolute chaotic infighting. They were tearing each other apart right in my private dining room, screaming accusations and crying over their impending poverty. But true to form, Beatrice could not take accountability for her own blind favoritism. The sheer terror of impending homelessness overrode her anger at Preston. She turned her frantic, panicked eyes back to me. The entitlement was a disease that had rotted her to the core. You have to fix this! Maya, Beatrice commanded, her voice shrill and desperate, tears ruining her expensive makeup. You are a millionaire. You own this entire building. You have to pay off Preston's debt right now. You have to save my house. I looked at her in genuine disbelief. You want me to pay $800,000 to clean up the mess made by the man who just threatened to destroy my business and report me to the health board. He is family. Beatrice screamed, slamming her fists on the table so hard a wine glass tipped over and shattered. You have the money. You owe us. If you do not write that check to the bank tomorrow morning, you are dead to me. Do you hear me, Maya? You are no longer my daughter. The heavy silence that blanketed the private dining room was brittle. It felt like the air had been sucked entirely out of the space. Beatrice stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The meticulously crafted mask of the wealthy Atlanta matriarch was slipping. Chloe was the first to break the quiet. She slammed her palm against the white linen tablecloth. The crystal wine glasses chimed violently against each other. You are a liar, Maya, Chloe snapped. Her voice was shrill and desperate. She looked around the room as if searching for an audience to validate her outrage. You are completely delusional. Mom never stole anything from you. She sacrificed her entire life for us. If she used any money, it was for household survival. We were struggling to maintain our home. We had to keep up appearances in our neighborhood so we would not be completely ostracized. I sat back in my chair and watched my younger sister perform. Chloe had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She had spent her entire life believing the false narrative Beatrice spoon-fed her. Household survival, I repeated slowly. I let the words hang in the air. Is that the story she told you, Chloe? Did she tell you that cashing a $60,000 check issued in my name was the only way to keep the lights on? Did she tell you that forging my signature on a bank document was an act of maternal sacrifice? Beatrice finally found her voice. It was trembling but thick with venom. I kept a roof over your head, Maya. You were living in my house eating the food I bought. That money was compensation for the years I spent raising you alone. You owed me for your childhood. I did what any mother would do to protect her family. I did not raise my voice. Raising my voice would mean they had affected me. Instead, I maintained eye contact with Beatrice. I remembered being 18 years old. I remembered checking the mail every single afternoon waiting for the acceptance letter from the Culinary Institute. I remembered working double shifts at a local diner, coming home smelling like grease and bleach, just hoping my talent would be recognized. Beatrice had intercepted that letter. She had looked me in the eyes and told me I was rejected. She told me I simply did not have the talent to succeed. I reached down into my leather tote bag resting beside my chair. I pulled out a sleek silver tablet. I unlocked the screen, tapping a secure folder. I hired a forensic accountant 3 years ago, I said. My voice was perfectly calm, echoing slightly in the private dining room. When I started expanding my hospitality group, I needed to ensure my credit history was absolutely spotless. I had to clean up the financial ruin you left in my name, Beatrice. My accounting team dug deep into the archives. They subpoenaed bank records from the institution where you opened that fraudulent joint account. I slid the tablet across the table. It glided smoothly over the white linen, stopping directly in front of Chloe. The bright screen illuminated her face. Preston leaned in closer to his wife, his eyes narrowing as he tried to read the glowing text. Look at the screen, Chloe, I commanded. Those are the official bank statements from 15 years ago. I want you to look at the exact dates the scholarship funds were depleted. It was not used for the mortgage. It was not used for groceries or household survival. Chloe stared down at the screen. I watched her eyes dart back and forth across the itemized ledger. I watched the blood drain from her face. Let me read it for you, I said, leaning forward, resting my arms on the table. $10,000 wired directly to a luxury bridal boutique in Buckhead. $15,000 transferred to a premium floral designer for imported orchids and custom centerpieces. $20,000 for a non-refundable deposit at the country club. I paused, letting the staggering amount sink into the room. You did not use my future for household survival, Beatrice, I said, my tone dripping with absolute disdain. You used my stolen culinary scholarship to pay for Chloe's lavish first wedding. You drained the money that was supposed to secure my education so you could buy a party. A party for a marriage to that chiropractor that lasted less than 2 years before he filed for divorce. Chloe's face flushed a deep, angry red. She pushed the tablet away violently. It knocked against a silver butter knife. The empirical proof was right there in front of her. The numbers did not lie. The bank statements could not be manipulated. But instead of showing an ounce of remorse or guilt, Chloe's hostility magnified instantly. Narcissistic rage took over completely. "I deserved a beautiful wedding," Chloe shouted, her voice cracking with fury. "I was marrying into a respectable family. We had to match their social standing. You were just going to waste that money learning how to chop onions in some sweaty kitchen. You were a nobody, Maya. You had no connections. I needed that money to secure my future. You needed my money to fund a fake lifestyle," I countered sharply. "I used my own 2 hands to build a multi-million-dollar empire. I scrubbed floors. I worked 20-hour days. I earned my success while you used my stolen funds to buy a temporary social status." Beatrice slammed her hands flat against the table. She was desperate to regain control of the narrative. "You are proving my point exactly, Maya. Look at you now. You own this restaurant. You have plenty of money. The fact that you are successful proves you never needed that scholarship in the first place. My decision pushed you to work harder. You should be thanking me." The mental gymnastics required to justify grand larceny as a parenting technique were astounding. She was entirely incapable of accountability. She expected me to express gratitude for her theft. "I succeeded in spite of you, Beatrice," I said, my voice cold and hard like ice. "I succeeded because I realized you would rather watch me fail than admit I possessed a talent Chloe never had. You chose her vanity over my survival. You stole my foundation and built a sandcastle for her. And now that sandcastle has completely washed away." Preston sat rigid in his chair. The arrogant smirk he had worn since arriving at the restaurant was completely gone. He looked at the bank statements on the tablet and then looked at his wife and his mother-in-law. He had married into this family believing they were wealthy elites. He had banked his own failing startup on the illusion of their old money status. Hearing the truth, hearing that Chloe's first wedding was funded by stolen scholarship money, shattered his delusion. But Preston was an opportunist. He realized the family he married into was built on fraud, but he also realized the sister-in-law he had been mocking all night was a legitimate millionaire. His ego could not handle being wrong, so he immediately went on the offensive. "This is ancient history," Preston interjected, his voice loud and aggressive. He pointed a finger at me. "You think digging up 15-year-old bank statements gives you power over us. You think you hold all the cards because you own one nice building in Atlanta. You have no idea how the real world operates, Maya." "I know exactly how it operates, Preston," I replied. "It operates on leverage, and right now I hold all of it." Chloe pointed her finger, joining her husband's attack. "You are just a vindictive, spiteful woman, Maya. You brought us here just to embarrass Mom on her birthday. You are a terrible person. I brought you here to show you that the woman you called a failure is the one who owns the room you are sitting in," I said. "You demanded I pay your bill. You mocked my clothes. You laughed at my career. The bank statements are just a reminder that the pedestal you stand on was bought with my money." The hostility in the room reached a boiling point. The empirical truth had cornered them entirely, and their reaction was pure, unadulterated venom. They could not dispute the bank records, so they attacked my character. They doubled down on their demands, proving that toxic people do not change when confronted with reality. They simply find new ways to attack. I sat quietly watching their anger spiral, knowing that my next move would dismantle their lives permanently. Preston pushed his chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He stood up, towering over the table. He unbuttoned his expensive suit jacket, trying to use his physical size to dominate the space. It was a classic intimidation tactic. He was a tall, white man accustomed to walking into rooms and having people defer to his unearned confidence. He looked down at me, expecting me to shrink away from his anger. I remained perfectly still, keeping my hands folded neatly on my lap. "You think you are so incredibly smart?" Maya Preston said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register. "You think pulling out some dusty bank statements from when you were a teenager means you have won the game? That is $60,000. In the corporate world, that is literal chump change. It is a rounding error. It means absolutely nothing. I looked up at him, tracking his movements. To a teenager working double shifts to afford bus fare, it meant everything. But I'm sure someone who has had his entire life funded by other people would not understand that concept. Preston slammed his hand on the back of Chloe's chair, causing her to jump slightly. Do not speak to me about how the world works. You got lucky. You managed to scrape together a decent hospitality business. Good for you. But running a kitchen and protecting a multi-million-dollar enterprise are two entirely different games, and you are playing completely out of your league. He began to pace slowly behind his wife and my mother. He was putting on a performance, trying to regain the superiority he had lost when he realized his wife's family was not the wealthy dynasty he had assumed. Let me explain reality to you, Maya. Preston continued, his tone dripping with condescension. Atlanta is a very small town at the top. It runs on connections. It runs on favors and networks that you do not have access to. My family has been operating in this city for 3 generations. I play golf with city council members. I sit on charity boards with the head of the zoning commission. I have the personal cell phone number of the director of the health department. Congratulations on your active social life, I said, my voice flat and unimpressed. Are you getting to a point, or are you just reciting your resume? Preston stopped pacing. He leaned heavily over the table, bringing his face dangerously close to mine. I could smell the expensive bourbon on his breath. The mask of the friendly, successful brother-in-law had completely vanished. In its place was a desperate, arrogant man who realized he needed my money to survive. My point is that I can destroy this restaurant with 3 phone calls, Preston stated clearly and deliberately. You think your little elite chef ambitions make you untouchable. They make you a target. One anonymous tip from a trusted source about a severe rodent infestation in your prep kitchen. That is all it takes. The health inspectors will swarm this building tomorrow morning during your lunch rush. They will tear your kitchen apart. They will find a reason to shut you down. They always do when they are told to. Chloe was nodding eagerly beside him. The humiliation of the stolen scholarship was completely forgotten. She was thrilled to watch her husband threaten my livelihood. She looked at me with pure venom, hoping his threats were breaking my composure. And if that does not work, Preston continued, his voice picking up momentum, I will have a friend at the State Liquor Board review your licensing. I will have the Zoning Commission audit your parking permits. I will bury you in so much red tape and bureaucratic litigation that you will bleed out in legal fees before the end of the fiscal year. I will systematically destroy everything you have built, Maya. I will take your restaurant and burn its reputation to the ground until you are forced to sell it to me for pennies on the dollar. I did not break eye contact. I absorbed his threats with the calm detachment of a predator watching its prey walk willingly into a trap. You are threatening to orchestrate a targeted harassment campaign using government officials to destroy a private business. You are laying out a conspiracy to commit fraud. I am laying out the reality of your situation, Preston corrected, pointing a finger inches from my face. You are vulnerable. You need protection. You need someone who speaks the language of the elite to insulate you from these kinds of attacks. And I am willing to offer you that protection. Consider it a business proposition. Extortion is not a business proposition, Preston. It is a felony. Preston laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. It is only a felony if you can prove it. And it is only extortion if we are not partners. So here is my formal ultimatum, Maya. Here is how you save your precious restaurant. He stepped back from the table, straightening his posture. He looked at Beatrice, who was watching him with absolute adoration. She loved this display of power. She loved seeing a man try to put me in my place. By tomorrow afternoon, you are going to have your lawyers draft a transfer of ownership, Preston commanded. You are going to surrender a 30% equity stake in this entire hospitality group directly to Chloe. You are going to create a seat on your executive board for me, and you are going to name me your chief financial officer. My starting salary will be $350,000 a year, guaranteed by a 5-year ironclad contract. You will also clear the bill for this dinner immediately. I let his demands echo in the quiet space of the private dining room. The sheer scale of his delusion was staggering. He had walked into my restaurant, insulted my profession, and was now demanding a massive cut of my life's work under the threat of complete ruin. And if I declined this generous offer, I asked, keeping my tone mild and inquisitive. "If you decline," Preston sneered, leaning back over the table, "I will make the phone calls before I even reach the valet stand. Your restaurant will be closed by Friday. You will be bankrupt by Christmas. You will end up right back where you started, a nobody with no money and no future." Beatrice clapped her hands together, a sharp cracking sound that broke the tension. She looked at me with triumphant, glowing eyes. "You see, Maya," Beatrice said, her voice filled with self-righteous authority. "This is exactly why you need family. Preston is offering you a lifeline. He is stepping up to protect you from the harsh realities of the business world. This is your chance to finally make things right with us. You have been so selfish keeping this success to yourself. Now you have an opportunity to share the wealth and elevate the Bennett family name. You should be thanking him." "Thanking him," I repeated. I shifted my gaze from Preston to my mother. "I should thank the man who just explicitly threatened to destroy my business if I do not hand over a third of my company to the sister who spent her life tearing me down." "It is family tax," Chloe chimed in, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. "You owe us for leaving us behind. You owe me for treating me so disrespectfully tonight. Preston is just taking what we deserve. Sign the papers tomorrow, Maya, or we will ruin you." I sat perfectly still. The trap was set. They had shown their entire hand. They had moved from entitlement to outright criminal extortion without a second thought. They believed their aggressive posturing made them powerful. They believed my silence was submission. "You have laid out your terms very clearly, Preston," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that commanded the entire room's attention. "You want 30% of my company. You want a massive salary. You want to control my finances. And you believe your political connections make you untouchable. I do not just believe it, Maya. I know it." Preston smirked, looking down at me like he had already won. I nodded slowly. I reached down to the floor beside my chair. It is fascinating how much confidence a desperate man can project. Because a man who actually had money and power would not need to extort his sister-in-law over a dinner table. A man with real wealth would not be drowning in so much debt that he resorts to grand larceny. Preston's smirk faltered. "What are you talking about?" I lifted my hand and signaled my head of security standing by the door. Then I reached into my leather bag for the second time tonight. It was time to execute the final blow. I did not break eye contact with Preston. I simply raised my right hand and gave a subtle nod to David, the head of my private security detail, who stood silently by the dining room door. David stepped forward slightly, a physical reminder that the power dynamic in this room belonged entirely to me. Then I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. I dropped it squarely onto the center of the table. The sharp, solid thud echoed over the quiet hum of the restaurant. Preston flinched. His eyes darted from the folder to my face. The arrogant swagger he had weaponized just seconds ago faltered, replaced by a sudden sharp paranoia. "What is that?" Chloe demanded, her voice losing its shrill confidence and dipping into genuine anxiety. "That," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm, "is a comprehensive financial dossier. When you demanded a job as my chief financial officer and threatened to destroy my business, I realized I needed to treat you like a hostile corporate entity. My security team runs deep background checks on anyone who attempts to extort this hospitality group. They finished your profile yesterday morning, Preston." Preston shifted his weight, loosening his expensive silk tie. He tried to force a laugh, but the sound was hollow and dry. "You are bluffing, Maya. You cannot just run a background check and find anything I do not want you to find. My company is private. Your company is bankrupt, Preston," I stated clearly. I opened the folder and spread the documents across the white linen. "You told this family your tech startup was pivoting to a new global market. You told Chloe you were securing a massive second round of funding. But reality is a lot less glamorous. Your primary investors pulled out 6 months ago after an internal audit revealed gross misappropriation of funds. You burned through $3 million of investor capital on luxury cars, country club memberships, and first-class flights to maintain the illusion of wealth. Chloe grabbed her husband's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. Preston, tell her she is lying. Tell her about the expansion. You just said we were looking at vacation homes in Miami next month. Preston did not look at his wife. He stared at the documents on the table, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. He swallowed hard, his throat clicking in the quiet room. The tough guy persona who had just threatened to call the health board was melting into a pathetic, sweating mess. He cannot tell you that, Chloe, because there is no expansion. I continued, smoothly refusing to let them breathe. But the failed startup is just the appetizer. Let us talk about the main course. When your investors cut you off, Preston, you still had to maintain the lavish lifestyle you promised my sister. You had to keep buying her designer bags to keep up appearances, so you went to a private offshore lender. You took out a high-interest short-term loan for $800,000. Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. $800,000, she whispered. Yes, Beatrice, I said, turning my gaze to my mother. $800,000. But here's the problem with private offshore lenders. They do not care about your country club status, and they do not care about your golf buddies on the city council. They care about collateral. And Preston had his credit completely destroyed. He had no assets to his name. He had nothing he could leverage to secure that kind of cash. I watched the gears slowly begin to turn in my mother's head. Beatrice had spent her entire life worshipping the aesthetic of success. She had welcomed Preston into the family without a second thought, simply because he was a confident white man who wore bespoke suits and spoke the language of elite privilege. She had trusted him implicitly because he represented the status she craved, while she scrutinized and punished me for actually working for a living. I slid a specific piece of paper from the stack and pushed it directly toward Beatrice. Tell me, Beatrice, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that commanded the room. Do you remember those legal documents Preston asked you to sign last October? The ones he told you were just character references and minor corporate guarantees for his new business venture. The ones you signed without having your own lawyer review, because you trusted your brilliant son-in-law completely. The color drained from Beatrice's face instantly. Her skin took on an ashen, sickly hue. Her eyes widened in absolute terror as she stared at the signature line on the document I had placed in front of her. What did you have me sign? Preston, Beatrice asked, her voice cracking barely more than a breath. Preston backed his chair away from the table, putting physical distance between himself and my mother. It was just a bridge loan, Beatrice, he stammered, raising his hands defensively. I just needed a temporary guarantor. I was going to pay it back the moment my new contracts closed. It was a temporary measure to protect the family lifestyle. It was not a bridge loan I cut in delivering the fatal blow. Preston used your home, Beatrice. The sprawling, pristine Atlanta estate you have lived in for 30 years. The house you used to host your high society garden parties. He used your home as fraudulent collateral for his $800,000 loan. He tied your only major asset to his sinking ship. Chloe let out a sharp, breathless sob, pressing both hands against her cheeks. Mom's house. You put a lien on Mom's house. And because Preston has completely defaulted on those payments for the last 4 months, I continued letting the brutal reality settle over them. The private lender has officially initiated the foreclosure process. The notices have already been filed with the county. The bank is going to seize your property, Beatrice. You are going to be evicted. You are going to lose the house, the status, and everything you care about because you handed the keys to a con artist. The illusion of the perfect elite Bennett family shattered into a million jagged pieces right in front of me. Beatrice began to shake violently. The woman who had spent the last 2 hours insulting my clothes, mocking my career, and demanding I pay a massive dinner bill, was suddenly staring down the barrel of complete financial ruin and absolute public humiliation. You stole my house! Beatrice screamed, the sound tearing through her throat. She lunged across the table toward Preston, her carefully maintained composure entirely destroyed. You arrogant, lying parasite! You stole my home. Preston stood up, knocking his chair backward. He held his hands up, his previous extortionist persona entirely gone, replaced by the panic of a cornered coward. I can fix it, Beatrice. Listen to me. I have meetings next week. I can restructure the debt. You cannot restructure an $800,000 defaulted loan when you have zero income, Chloe shrieked, turning on her husband with vicious speed. The loyalty between the golden child and her perfect husband evaporated the second the money disappeared. You told me we were rich. You told me my sister was the embarrassment to this family. I sat perfectly still in the center of the storm. 10 minutes ago, they were a united front using my mother's birthday dinner to gang up on me, belittle my existence, and extort my business. Now they were tearing each other apart, their toxic alliance collapsing under the weight of empirical proof. I watched them scream and panic, feeling no pity, no guilt, and no desire to intervene. The private dining room descended into absolute chaos. Beatrice snatched the foreclosure notice from the table. Her hands were shaking so violently that the heavy parchment paper rattled against her diamond rings. She shoved the document directly into Preston's chest. Her perfectly manicured nails crumpled the expensive fabric of his blazer. "You lied to me!" Beatrice screamed. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was entirely stripped of the refined Atlanta matriarch persona she had spent decades cultivating. You sat in my living room drinking my wine, and you told me this was a standard corporate guarantee. You looked me in the eyes and promised me my estate was perfectly safe. You told me your company was valued at $50 million. Preston scrambled backward, nearly tripping over the legs of his dining chair. His face was slick with sweat. The arrogant tech bro who had just threatened to orchestrate a government raid on my kitchen was completely gone. In his place was a pathetic, desperate fraud facing the collapse of his entire grift. It was safe, Beatrice Preston pleaded, holding his hands up defensively. I just needed a 30-day bridge to cover the offshore accounts. The primary investors pulled out without warning. It was an unpredictable market fluctuation. I am a victim here too. I was trying to maintain the lifestyle Chloe demands. I was doing this for your daughter. Chloe whipped her head around to glare at her husband. The heavy diamond necklace she wore suddenly looked like a collar bought with stolen funds. Do not you dare blame this on me, Preston, Chloe shrieked. Her voice echoed sharply off the acoustic panels of the ceiling. You told me you sold your stock options to buy my new car last month. Were you using offshore loan money to pay for my clothes? Are we broke? Tell me right now, Preston, are we completely broke? We are restructuring, Chloe, Preston stammered, running a trembling hand through his hair. I just need a little more time to secure the next round of venture capital. We just need to weather this storm and keep up appearances. Keep up appearances, Beatrice yelled, stepping toward him with such ferocity that David, my head of security, shifted his weight, preparing to intervene. The bank is taking my house, Preston. They are seizing the property I have owned for 30 years. My friends live on that street. The country club board members live on that street. When the foreclosure signs go up on my front lawn, I will be a laughingstock. I will be ruined. I sat back in my chair and took a slow, measured sip of my sparkling water. The ice clinked softly against the crystal glass. It was a fascinating psychological study. 10 minutes ago, Preston was a brilliant businessman, according to my mother. He was the savior of the Bennett family name. Now the illusion was entirely shattered. The wealthy white savior she had worshipped simply because he wore a bespoke suit and spoke with unearned confidence had literally signed away her home. But the most predictable part of dealing with a narcissist is that they can never process their own poor judgment. Beatrice could not accept that she had been foolish enough to trust a con artist over her own flesh and blood. The reality of her impending homelessness was crashing down on her, but her brain desperately needed a scapegoat. She needed someone to blame, and more importantly, she needed someone to fix it. Beatrice dropped the crumpled foreclosure notice onto the floor. She slowly turned her head toward me. Her chest was heaving, her expensive silk blouse stained with a single drop of spilled wine. She looked at my calm demeanor. She looked at the polished luxury of the private dining room I owned. I watched the terror in her eyes solidify into something entirely different. The panic mutated back into aggressive entitlement. "You," Beatrice said, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "You are going to fix this." I raised a single eyebrow, refusing to break eye contact. "Excuse me, you heard me?" Maya Beatrice commanded, her voice rising to a frantic, hysterical pitch. "You own this restaurant. You own this entire hospitality group. You have millions of dollars sitting in corporate accounts. You are going to call your bank tomorrow morning. You are going to wire $800,000 to clear this offshore debt, and you are going to save my house." I looked at her in genuine awe of her audacity. "You want me to pay nearly $1 million to clean up a catastrophic financial crime committed by the man who just threatened to destroy my business." "He is your brother-in-law," Beatrice screamed, slamming her fist down on the table. "We are your family. You have the money, Maya. You have been hiding all this wealth from us for years while we worried about you. You owe us. If you do not pay off that loan, I will be on the street." I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the edge of the table. "Let us get the facts completely straight, Beatrice. You walked into my restaurant tonight. You mocked my clothes. You insulted my career. You threw a $4,000 bill in my face and told me it was my tax for being a disappointment. When you found out I was successful, you demanded free food. When your son-in-law tried to extort 30% of my company from me, you cheered him on. And now you expect me to write a check to save your social status." Chloe wiped her tear-streaked face, smudging her designer makeup. She glared at me with pure hatred. "You have to do it, Maya. You cannot let Mom lose the house. You have the money. Stop being so incredibly selfish. If you do not pay the debt, Preston might go to jail." "That sounds like a Preston problem, Chloe," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "Not a Maya problem. I suggest you start looking for a very aggressive defense attorney. Or perhaps you can use the leftover money from the culinary scholarship you stole from me 15 years ago. Oh, wait, you blew that on a wedding that ended in a divorce." Beatrice's face twisted into a mask of absolute desperation and rage. She realized logic was not going to work. She realized her authority was completely gone. So she resorted to the only weapon she had left in her arsenal: emotional blackmail. She squared her shoulders, trying to summon the imposing matriarch persona that had terrorized me for 35 years. "Listen to me very carefully," Maya Beatrice stated, her voice shaking with dark, absolute fury. "You are going to write that check to the bank tomorrow. You are going to clear Preston's debt, and you are going to save your mother's home. If you do not do this, you are dead to me. If you let this family fall apart because you are too bitter to share your wealth, I will never forgive you. You will be permanently disowned. You will no longer be my daughter." She stood there, chest heaving, waiting for the threat to land. She expected me to crumble. She expected the terrified little girl who used to beg for her approval to resurface and yield to her demands. She expected the threat of losing my mother to force my hand. I looked at Beatrice, taking in the full measure of the woman who had spent my entire life trying to break my spirit. I felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no guilt, no sadness. Just pure, cold clarity. "You cannot disown someone who already walked away, Beatrice," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of the panic she so desperately wanted to see. "You are threatening to take away a relationship that has not existed for a decade and a half. I stopped being your daughter the day you stole my future to fund Chloe's vanity. I stopped being your family the moment you decided my sole purpose on this earth was to be a stepping stone for the golden child." Beatrice stood there, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. The grand matriarch of the Bennett family was entirely out of ammunition. Her ultimate weapon, the threat of her absence, meant absolutely nothing to me. I stood up from my chair, slowly smoothing the fabric of my tailored black dress. I looked down at the three of them. They looked like strangers. Pathetic, greedy strangers who had just realized the bank vault they were trying to rob was actually a steel trap. "The free ride is officially over," I announced. "The ATM is permanently closed. I am not paying off an $800,000 loan to save your house, Beatrice. I am not hiring a fraudulent con artist to run my finances. And I am certainly not handing over a single percentage of my life's work to a sister who has spent 35 years treating me like dirt on her shoe." I raised my hand and signaled my head of security. David immediately stepped fully into the room, followed by two other security personnel dressed in immaculate black suits. They moved with quiet professional efficiency, standing directly behind my family's chairs. "It is time for my guests to leave," I instructed David. Chloe's eyes darted between the massive security guards and me. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "You are kicking us out. You are kicking your own mother out of a restaurant on her 60th birthday. I am evicting hostile patrons who attempted to extort my business," I corrected her. "But before you go, there is one final matter of business." I reached across the white linen tablecloth and tapped my index finger against the black leather billfold. The $4,200 check that Preston had so arrogantly tossed in my direction just an hour earlier. "Pay your bill, Beatrice," I commanded. Beatrice recoiled, as if the leather folder had suddenly caught fire. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "I am not paying for this. You own the restaurant, Maya. You cannot force me to pay for a birthday dinner." "I absolutely can, and I absolutely will," I replied. "You ordered vintage champagne. You ordered white truffles and Wagyu beef. You consumed the product, and now you will pay for the service. You wanted to play the role of the wealthy elite tonight. Now you get to pay the elite prices." Preston scoffed, trying to summon one last ounce of defiance. "We are not paying a dime, Maya. What are you going to do about it?" I looked directly at Preston. "If you walk out of this establishment without settling that check, it is legally considered theft of services. I will not hesitate to call the Atlanta Police Department. I will have squad cars waiting for you at the valet stand. I will have you arrested in front of every single patron in this building." Now tell me, Preston, do you really want the police running your name tonight? Do you really want law enforcement asking questions about your finances when you have an $800,000 fraudulent loan hanging over your head? Preston's face went completely slack. The threat of police involvement terrified him. He knew an arrest would trigger an immediate review of his background, and the offshore lenders would be alerted. He turned to Beatrice, his eyes wide with panic. "Pay the bill, Beatrice," Preston hissed, grabbing her arm. "Just pay the damn bill. We cannot have the police here. We need to leave right now." Beatrice looked at her son-in-law with absolute disgust. "You are the one who ordered the $500 bottles of champagne," she yelled at him. "You pay for it. My cards will decline." "Beatrice." Preston admitted, his voice dropping to an embarrassed, furious whisper. "You know they will decline. Just put it on your card. We have to get out of here before she calls the cops." The humiliation was absolute. Beatrice, the woman who had spent the entire evening boasting to the neighboring tables about her wealth, was now being forced to cover a massive bill by the fraudulent son-in-law who had just ruined her life. Her hands shook violently as she opened her designer purse. She pulled out a platinum credit card and practically threw it onto the table. Her eyes were filled with tears of pure rage and defeat. David picked up the card and the billfold, stepping out of the room to process the payment. The silence that followed was heavy and final. There was no more screaming. There were no more threats. The reality of their destruction had completely settled over them. A minute later, David returned. He placed the receipt and the credit card on the table in front of Beatrice. She snatched it up, shoving it back into her purse without looking at it. "Escort them out," I said to David, "through the main dining room." Beatrice gasped. "Maya, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Do not do this. Do not make us walk through the main room. My friends are out there. The Johnsons are out there. Let us use the back exit." "You wanted an audience all night, Beatrice," I reminded her coldly. "You wanted everyone to hear how much of a disappointment I was. Now they get to watch you leave." David and the security guard stepped forward, gesturing toward the door. Preston kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone. He practically sprinted out of the private room, desperate to escape the consequences of his own arrogance. Chloe followed closely behind him, sobbing quietly into her hands, her diamond necklace catching the light one last time. Beatrice was the last to leave. She stood in the doorway and looked back at me. There was a lifetime of resentment in her eyes, but also the horrifying realization that she had completely lost. She had bet her entire future on the golden child, and she had lost everything. I did not offer her a parting word. I simply turned my back to her and looked out the window. I heard the heavy frosted glass door click shut behind her. I stood alone in the private dining room. Through the glass partition I could see the reflection of the main floor. I watched my security team escort my family through the crowded restaurant. I watched the wealthy patrons of Atlanta stop eating and turn their heads to stare. I watched the whispers spread through the room as the great Beatrice Bennett and her perfect family were unceremoniously marched out the front doors. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt incredibly light. For the first time in 35 years, the heavy, suffocating weight of their expectations and their cruelty was completely gone. I had established the ultimate boundary. I had protected my empire, and I had finally severed the toxic chains that bound me to their dysfunction. I poured myself one last glass of sparkling water and raised it in a silent toast to my own survival. I arrived at the restaurant at 6 the next morning. The main dining room was completely empty, smelling faintly of beeswax polish and the fresh lilies arranged at the hostess stand. I walked through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The stainless steel prep tables gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights. The massive stock pots were already simmering, filling the air with the rich scent of roasted bones and mirepoix. For exactly 3 hours, I felt a profound, unshakable sense of peace. I had amputated the diseased limb of my family tree. I was ready to move forward. That peace ended precisely at 9:15. Zara, my director of public relations, burst into my private office upstairs. She did not knock. Her face was tight with panic, and she was clutching her tablet so hard her knuckles were gray. Zara was a brilliant woman who rarely lost her composure, but right now she looked like she had seen a ghost. "You need to look at this right now," Zara said, her voice trembling. She placed the tablet flat on my mahogany desk and hit play. The screen illuminated with my sister's face. Chloe was sitting in her massive suburban kitchen. The aesthetic was entirely calculated. She wore an oversized gray sweater that made her look fragile and small. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun. She wore absolutely no makeup, allowing the dark circles under her eyes to be clearly visible. It was the universal uniform of the internet victim. Chloe stared directly into the camera lens. Her lower lip quivered perfectly on cue. Real tears welled up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. She took a shuddering breath before she began to speak. "Hi everyone," Chloe said, her voice cracking with manufactured trauma. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this. I am shaking just recording it. But I need to speak out to protect my family and to warn the community about a very dangerous person. Last night was supposed to be a beautiful celebration for my mother's 60th birthday. We went to a restaurant called Lumiere here in Atlanta. It is owned by my older sister, Maya Bennett." Chloe paused, wiping a tear from her cheek with the sleeve of her oversized sweater. She looked down at the counter as if gathering the strength to recount a nightmare. "My sister has always struggled with her mental health." Chloe lied smoothly, weaving the fiction with incredible precision. "We have tried to support her for years, but last night she had a complete psychotic break. We were sitting in the private dining room just trying to celebrate our mother. Out of nowhere, Maya snapped. She started screaming at us. She threw a heavy leather billfold directly at my face, and then she attacked our mother." I sat perfectly still watching my sister commit character assassination on a massive scale. "She physically shoved our 60-year-old mother backward." Chloe sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. "My husband Preston tried to intervene to protect my mom. He just wanted to de-escalate the situation. But Maya turned on him. She started screaming the most vile, horrific racial slurs at Preston. She hates him because he is white and because he is successful. She told him he did not belong in her restaurant or in our family. She had her massive security guards physically drag us out into the street like criminals. My mother was hyperventilating on the pavement. Chloe looked back up at the camera, her eyes wide and pleading. "I am making this video because people need to know who they are giving their money to," Chloe concluded. "Maya Bennett is a violent, unstable woman who physically abuses her elderly mother and discriminates against people based on their race. She runs a toxic, abusive workplace. Please do not support Lumiere. Please do not fund her cruelty. Thank you for listening." The video ended. The screen went black. I looked up at Zara, who was standing nervously in front of my desk. "I checked the analytics 5 minutes ago," Zara said, swallowing hard. It has over 1 million views, Maya. It was posted across all her social media platforms at 6 this morning. It has been picked up by 3 local Atlanta gossip blogs. The algorithm is pushing it aggressively because of the racial discrimination claims. It is a public relations nightmare. I turned my chair to face the large window overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Chloe was a brilliant manipulator. She knew exactly what she was doing. She had failed to extort 30% of my company in private, so she immediately pivoted to destroying the company in public. By accusing me of hurling anti-white slurs at Preston, she was intentionally weaponizing the current social climate. She was trying to alienate my diverse clientele and scare away my high-profile corporate investors. She added the lie about physically assaulting an elderly black woman to completely destroy my character in the local community. What is the operational impact, I asked, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. Zara pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. The restaurant phone lines have not stopped ringing since 8 o'clock. The hostesses are completely overwhelmed. We have had 64 dinner cancellations in the last hour alone. 2 large corporate parties just pulled their reservations for next week, citing the controversy. And our digital footprint, I prompted. It is a bloodbath, Zara admitted. We are being targeted by a massive coordinated review bombing campaign. People who have never even stepped foot in the state of Georgia are leaving 1-star reviews on our Google and Yelp pages. They are calling you a racist and a sociopath. We have dropped from a 4.9 average to a 2.1 in under 3 hours. If this continues at this pace, the brand will sustain permanent structural damage. I absorbed the data. My family had ignited a digital wildfire intended to burn my life's work to ash. They wanted to create so much pressure, so much financial terror, that I would be forced to capitulate to their demands just to make the pain stop. They thought they could shame me into submission. We need to issue a statement immediately, Zara urged, stepping closer to the desk. We need to draft a soft, empathetic response. We can say it was a private family misunderstanding that escalated, unfortunately. We can express regret for any distress caused to your mother, and assert that Lumiere stands against all forms of discrimination. If we offer a public apology, we might be able to stop the bleeding before the evening news networks pick this up. I turned my chair back around and looked Zara directly in the eyes. I am not apologizing, Zara. I am not issuing a soft statement, and I am certainly not expressing regret for throwing those parasites out of my building. Maya, please, Zara pleaded. I understand you are angry, but this is about crisis management. The public loves a humble apology. If you stay silent or get defensive, it validates Chloe's narrative. They will label you as the angry, bitter woman she described in the video. We have to play the public relations game to save the restaurant. This is not a public relations game, Zara. I said, my tone sharp and absolute. This is a highly coordinated extortion attempt. That woman in the video is not a traumatized victim. She is a fraud attempting to cover up a massive financial crime committed by her husband. If I apologize, I legitimize her lies. If I offer a soft statement, I tell the world she is telling the truth. Zara ran a hand through her hair, clearly distressed by the rapidly deteriorating situation. Then what do we do, Maya? We cannot just let this video circulate unchallenged. It is going to kill the business. My phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID flashed brightly on the screen. It was Beatrice. My mother was calling me directly right in the middle of the viral storm she had helped orchestrate. I looked at the ringing phone and then looked back at my public relations director. We do not do anything right now, I instructed Zara. We let them think they are winning. Go down to the kitchen. Tell Julian to prep for a full service tonight. Tell the hostesses to stop answering the phones. Let it go to voicemail. But the cancellations, Zara protested. Let them cancel, I commanded. I will not have my staff terrorized by internet trolls. Lock down our social media pages. Turn off the comments. We are going into a complete communications blackout until I say otherwise. Zara hesitated, clearly struggling with my unconventional strategy, but she respected me enough to follow my orders. She nodded sharply and left the office, closing the heavy oak door behind her. I sat alone in the quiet of my office. The phone finally stopped ringing, indicating Beatrice had left a voicemail. I picked up the device. Chloe had played her opening move beautifully. She had commanded the world's attention and painted herself as a martyr. But Chloe was sloppy. She forgot that she was not operating in a vacuum. She forgot that my private dining room was my territory. I pressed play on the voicemail knowing exactly what my mother was about to demand. I pressed the speaker button on my desk phone and leaned back in my leather chair. The digital timer on the screen began to tick forward. Beatrice's voice filled my quiet office. She did not sound like the frantic, terrified woman who had been marched out of my dining room the night before. She sounded incredibly smug. She had watched the social media metrics all morning, and she believed she had successfully backed me into a corner. "Maya, I know you are watching the internet right now." Beatrice began, her tone dripping with false maternal concern. "Chloe's video is everywhere. I see your restaurant is taking quite a hit. The local news channels just reached out to my publicist asking for an interview. It is a tragedy, really. All your hard work completely destroyed in a single morning." I listened to the steady rhythm of her breathing on the recording. She was pacing. I could hear the faint click of her heels on her hardwood floors. "But we are family," Beatrice continued. "And family protects each other. Chloe is very distressed, but I have spoken with her and with Preston. We are willing to offer you a way out of this nightmare. Chloe will delete the video across all her platforms. She will issue a public written retraction stating that her emotions got the better of her and that there was a massive misunderstanding. She will publicly clear your name and tell her followers that Lumiere is a wonderful establishment. She will stop the news networks from running the story tonight." There was a sharp pause on the line. The bait had been presented. Now came the hook. "We will make this entire public relations crisis vanish by noon," Beatrice stated, her voice dropping into a cold, transactional register. "But you need to do your part. You will wire $800,000 directly to Preston's lender before the banks close at 5 o'clock today. You will clear the debt entirely, and you will secure my home. If you make that transfer, Chloe will post the apology video immediately. If you refuse, we are doing an exclusive sit-down interview with the evening news at 6. We will tell them everything Chloe said and more. You have until 5 o'clock, Maya. Do the right thing." The voicemail clicked and ended. The automated voice of the phone system asked if I wanted to save or delete the message. I hit save. I sat in the silence of my office. Beatrice had just handed me the exact rope I needed to hang her. She was so blinded by her desperation to save her social status and her golden child's lifestyle that she had committed federal extortion on a recorded line. She had explicitly offered to trade a public retraction for an $800,000 payoff. It was a textbook shakedown. The heavy oak door to my office opened again. Zara walked back in. She had not knocked. Her tailored suit looked slightly rumpled, and she was carrying a stack of printed analytics reports. The color had completely drained from her face. "It is getting worse," Zara said, placing the papers on my desk. "The local news affiliates are starting to call my personal cell phone. They are running teasers for the evening broadcast, promising an exclusive look into a toxic workplace environment at one of Atlanta's top restaurants. The review bombing has crossed over to our reservation platform. We are losing thousands of dollars in booked revenue by the hour. We are bleeding, Maya." I pushed the phone across the desk toward her. "Listen to this," I instructed. Zara hit play and listened to the entire voicemail from Beatrice. I watched my public relations director process the information. I expected her to be outraged by the blatant blackmail. Instead, Zara let out a long, heavy sigh of relief. She looked at me with desperate, hopeful eyes. "Maya, this is our way out," Zara said, her voice rushing with sudden adrenaline. "We can make this stop right now." I stared at her, narrowing my eyes. "You want me to pay them?" Zara nodded, tapping the stack of cancellation reports on my desk. "Maya, you have the capital. $800,000 is a massive hit, but it is a fraction of what this brand will lose if this story goes to national syndication. If they do that evening news interview, we will face a total boycott. We can process the payment through a secondary corporate account. We classify it as a silent settlement or a brand protection expenditure. We pay the extortionists, they take down the video, and we issue a joint statement about family healing. It is standard corporate crisis management. We buy our way out of the fire." I stood up from my chair. I walked around the desk until I was standing directly in front of Zara. I respected her expertise, but she fundamentally misunderstood the enemy we were dealing with. If I pay them a single dime, Zara, I said, my voice dangerously calm, I am validating their extortion. If I wire $800,000 to cover Preston's fraudulent loan, I am telling Beatrice that her terrorism works. You think paying them buys peace. It does not. It buys a temporary ceasefire until Preston's next failed venture. It teaches Chloe that every time she wants a new designer lifestyle, all she has to do is turn on a camera and cry. If I give them this money, I become their hostage for the rest of my life. But the restaurant, Zara pleaded, gesturing wildly to the window. The brand is going to burn to the ground, Maya. Let it catch fire, I replied fiercely. I built this empire with my own 2 hands from absolute nothing. I know how to survive the heat. They do not. They are soft, entitled parasites who panic the second the money stops flowing. I am not playing defense anymore, Zara. I am not hiding behind soft public relations statements, and I am absolutely not negotiating with terrorists. I walked over to my desk and picked up my cell phone. I bypassed Zara and opened my contacts. I was not calling my bank to authorize a wire transfer. I was calling David, my head of security, and my lead corporate attorney. What are you doing? Zara asked, her voice laced with dread as she watched me dial the number. I am choosing the nuclear option, I stated, pressing the phone to my ear. Beatrice wants to use cameras to tell a story, so we are going to show the world exactly what happened in that private dining room. I am going to let them burn themselves alive. David answered on the second ring. His voice was crisp and alert. David, I said, turning to face the window overlooking the city. Go down to the security control room. I need the unedited high-definition security footage from private dining room A from last night. I need the entire 2-hour block from the moment they sat down to the moment you escorted them out. And make sure the audio track is perfectly synced. Understood, Ms. Bennett. David replied without hesitation. Do you want it sent to your private server? No, I commanded. I want you to bring it directly to my office on an encrypted drive. We have a lot of uploading to do. I hung up the phone and looked back at Zara. She was staring at me wide-eyed, realizing exactly what I was about to do. I was about to release a digital atomic bomb. Draft a press release. Zara, I instructed, my tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. Do not apologize for anything. Simply state that Lumiere believes in absolute transparency, and that we are releasing the unedited security footage to provide the full context of last night's events. Get our legal team to clear it for immediate publication across all our platforms. We are going to war, I added, stepping back behind my desk. And I plan to win. 10 minutes later, my office door opened. David stepped inside holding a small silver flash drive. He placed it squarely on the center of my desk. He did not say a word, simply giving me a firm nod before stepping back to stand guard by the door. My lead corporate attorney, Carter, arrived less than 5 minutes after that. Carter was a brilliant, ruthless litigator who handled all my acquisitions and vendor contracts. He walked into the office, dropping his leather briefcase onto the sofa. He looked at the tension radiating from Zara, and then looked at me. You declared a legal emergency, Maya, Carter said, taking a seat across from my desk. Tell me exactly what we are dealing with. Extortion, I replied flatly. Defamation, grand larceny, and a highly coordinated attempt to commit corporate sabotage. I plugged the silver drive into my desktop computer. I mirrored my screen to the large, flat panel monitor mounted on the office wall. Zara and Carter turned their chairs to face the screen. My sister released a fabricated video this morning, I explained as I queued up the security files. She claimed I suffered a violent mental breakdown. She accused me of physically assaulting our mother and shouting racial slurs at her husband. That video is currently destroying my restaurant's digital footprint. Our reservations are collapsing. Carter immediately reached for his legal pad, his expression hardening. That is libel per se. We can file an injunction and issue a cease and desist within the hour. A cease and desist is a warning, Carter. I said, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I am not giving them a warning. I am giving them an execution. This is the unedited high-definition security footage from private dining room A from last night. I want you to tell me exactly how much prison time my brother-in-law is looking at. I hit play. The screen flared to life in stunning 4K resolution. The audio was crystal clear, captured by the advanced microphone arrays I had installed during the restaurant's renovation. I had spent thousands of dollars ensuring my private dining rooms were secure and monitored to protect my high-profile celebrity clients. Now that investment was about to save my entire empire. We sat in absolute silence and watched the reality of the previous evening unfold. The camera captured everything with brutal, unforgiving clarity. We watched Chloe smirking as she tossed the $4,200 billfold across the table. We watched Preston leaning over the white linen, jabbing his finger aggressively in my direction. The audio picked up his exact words, echoing perfectly through the speakers in my office. "I will make the phone calls before I even reach the valet stand. Your restaurant will be closed by Friday. You will be bankrupt by Christmas. You will end up right back where you started." Carter stopped writing. He stared at the screen, his eyes narrowing. He is explicitly threatening to use government contacts to orchestrate arbitrary health inspections to shut down a private business. Carter stated, his voice entirely clinical. He is demanding a 30% equity stake and a massive salary under the direct threat of corporate sabotage. Maya, this is not just a civil dispute, this is a felony. This is textbook extortion. "Keep watching," I instructed. The video continued to play. The scene shifted to the moment I dropped the financial dossier on the table. The high-definition camera zoomed in perfectly on Beatrice's face as the reality of her impending foreclosure hit her. The audio captured her screaming at Preston. It captured her admitting to the fraudulent offshore loan. It captured Preston confessing that he used her house as collateral without a proper bridge loan structure. "There it is," Carter said, pointing his pen at the screen. "Admitting to securing an offshore loan using an unauthorized property deed. That is bank fraud. If the federal regulators see this footage, he is going to face severe mandatory minimums." Then came the final nail in the coffin. The footage captured Beatrice demanding I pay off the $800,000 debt. It captured her explicit admission regarding the culinary scholarship she stole from me 15 years ago. It caught Chloe screaming about how she deserved the stolen money to pay for her luxury wedding. I hit pause. The screen froze on an image of my family looking like panicked, greedy animals tearing each other apart. I turned to look at Zara. My public relations director was staring at the monitor with her mouth slightly open. The terror that had consumed her for the last 2 hours was completely gone. The blood had rushed back to her face. She looked at the frozen image of Chloe on the screen and then thought about the tearful victim narrative Chloe had just sold to 1 million people online. "She lied about everything," Zara whispered, staring at the screen. "There were no racial slurs. There was no physical assault. She completely fabricated the entire narrative to cover up the fact that they are broke and facing federal fraud charges." "They tried to burn my house down because I refused to pay their ransom," I said, "and they gave me the matches." Zara stood up. Her posture completely changed. She was no longer a panicked employee trying to mitigate a crisis. She was a public relations shark who had just been handed the most perfect counter-narrative in digital history. "We do not draft a soft statement," Zara said, her voice rushing with fierce energy. "We do not apologize for a single thing. We drop this video raw. We release the footage entirely unedited. We let the public watch the transition from their entitled arrogance to their absolute criminal panic." Carter nodded in agreement, organizing his legal notes. "I will draft a formal legal release to accompany the video. We will state that the footage is being provided to law enforcement regarding the extortion threats and the admitted bank fraud. We will tag the local police department and the State Financial Regulatory Board in the initial release. We make it a legal matter, not just a family dispute." "I want it everywhere," I commanded, looking between the two of them. "I want it sent to the local news stations who were preparing to run Chloe's story tonight. I want it uploaded to our official website. I want it pinned to the top of all our social media platforms. They wanted to use the court of public opinion to bankrupt me. We are going to let the court of public opinion see exactly who they are." "What about your mother's voicemail from this morning?" Carter asked. "The one where she offered to delete Chloe's video in exchange for the $800,000 wire transfer." "We append the audio of that voicemail to the very end of the security footage," I instructed. "We let the public watch them threaten me in the restaurant, and then we let the public hear Beatrice demanding the ransom money the next morning. It establishes the clear, undeniable timeline of their blackmail." Zara picked up her tablet, her fingers moving rapidly as she began drafting the tactical release schedule. "The contrast is going to break the internet, Maya. Chloe's video has her looking like a traumatized victim. Our video shows her screaming about her stolen wedding money and threatening to ruin you. The backlash against them is going to be biblical." "I am not interested in biblical, Zara. I am interested in definitive," I replied. "I want them completely neutralized. I want to make sure that Preston can never secure another business loan in his life. I want to make sure Chloe can never weaponize her tears again. And I want Beatrice to finally understand that actions have permanent, irreversible consequences." I sat down at my desk and pulled a blank sheet of branded stationery toward me. I uncapped my fountain pen. I was ready to sign the authorization to release the files. "Execute the strategy," I ordered, my voice cold and absolute. "Light them up." I watched Zara press the enter key on her laptop. With that single decisive motion, the encrypted files were blasted out into the digital ether. She uploaded the unedited security footage directly to our main website and pinned it across every single one of Lumiere's social media platforms. Simultaneously, Carter hit send on a mass email directed to the news desks of every major local and regional television affiliate in Atlanta. He CC'd the Atlanta Police Department and the Georgia Financial Regulatory Board. There was no soft public relations spin. There was no corporate apology. The caption I dictated was entirely clinical. It stated that Lumiere Hospitality Group was releasing this raw footage to provide complete transparency regarding a targeted extortion attempt and to assist local law enforcement in their ongoing investigations of bank fraud. Then we sat back and watched the internet catch fire. The contrast between the two videos was an absolute masterpiece of psychological destruction. Chloe had spent her morning staring into a smartphone camera, wearing an oversized gray sweater and no makeup, crying about being a traumatized victim. She had painted herself as a fragile woman who had been violently attacked. The security footage showed the brutal, undeniable reality. The public was suddenly watching pristine 4K resolution video from 4 different camera angles in my private dining room. They saw Chloe dripping in diamonds sitting across a table littered with empty bottles of vintage champagne and half-eaten Wagyu steak. They watched her sneer with aggressive entitlement as she slid a $4,200 billfold across the white linen, demanding I pay it as my tax for being a disappointment. The audio was horrifyingly clear. The internet heard every single venomous word. They watched Preston, an arrogant white man attempting to intimidate an African-American female business owner. They heard him explicitly threaten to use his elite political connections to orchestrate arbitrary health inspections and revoke my liquor license. They listened to him demand a 30% equity stake in my multi-million-dollar company and a guaranteed salary of $350,000. The public watched him outline a textbook corporate extortion plot with total, unapologetic confidence. But the absolute destruction of their reputation happened when I dropped the financial dossier on the table. We watched the live viewer count on our platform skyrocket from 10,000 to 100,000 in a matter of minutes. The public watched in real time as the wealthy elite Bennett family illusion collapsed. They heard Preston admit on camera that his tech startup was bankrupt. They heard him confess to taking out an $800,000 loan from a private offshore lender. And the collective internet gasped when they heard him admit to using Beatrice's home as fraudulent collateral without a proper bridge loan structure. The comments section, which had been locked down all morning, was reopened. It instantly transformed into a tidal wave of absolute outrage, directed entirely at my family. The very same people who had been leaving one-star reviews an hour ago were now frantically deleting them and turning their digital pitchforks toward Chloe and Preston. Then the footage reached the ultimate betrayal. The public watched Beatrice, a woman who had just been actively bragging about her social status, physically recoil as I confronted her about my stolen culinary scholarship. They heard the matriarch of the family scream that she deserved to steal $60,000 from her teenage daughter as compensation for raising me. They heard Chloe screaming right back, furiously defending the fact that my stolen future was used to pay for her lavish luxury wedding. It was an unprecedented display of grand larceny and narcissistic greed broadcast directly to millions of smartphones. The video on our platforms faded to black, but the post was not over. The black screen held for 2 seconds before a crisp audio recording began to play. It was the voicemail Beatrice had left me just hours earlier. The audio quality was pristine. Maya, I know you are watching the internet right now. Chloe's video is everywhere. The public listened in stunned silence as Beatrice laid out her explicit blackmail demands. They heard her promise that Chloe would delete her fake crying video and issue a public retraction, but only if I wired $800,000 directly to Preston's lender by 5 o'clock that evening. They heard her threaten to go to the evening news with more fabricated lies if I refused to pay the ransom. It was the most undeniable concrete proof of criminal extortion ever captured on a simple voicemail. Zara was pacing the length of my office, her eyes glued to the analytics dashboard on her tablet. Her hands were shaking, but this time it was from pure adrenaline. "It is a total sweep," Zara announced, her voice echoing with excitement. "The hashtags demanding Preston be arrested are trending nationally. The review bombing on our reservation platform has completely stopped. People are actually flooding our system trying to book tables just to show solidarity. We are gaining thousands of positive reviews from the local community who are absolutely disgusted by Preston threatening a Black-owned business with corrupt city inspectors. You did not just save the brand, Maya, you turned it into a fortress." Carter's cell phone rang sharply, cutting through the energy in the room. He looked at the caller ID and smiled a slow, predatory smile. He put the call on speakerphone and placed it on my mahogany desk. Carter speaking, he answered smoothly. "This is Marcus Vance, the senior executive producer for Channel 2 Action News." A frantic voice blared through the speaker. "We received your press release and the video files. Our legal department just cleared the footage. We had an interview scheduled with Beatrice and Chloe Bennett for our 6 o'clock broadcast tonight regarding their abuse allegations. We are pulling their segment immediately. We are swapping the lead story. We are going to run an investigative report on Preston Cole's admitted bank fraud and the extortion attempt against Lumiere. Is Ms. Bennett available for a live comment?" Carter looked at me, raising an eyebrow in question. I shook my head once, a silent refusal. "Ms. Bennett is currently focused on running her restaurant." Marcus Carter replied, his tone perfectly calibrated for professional detachment. "The footage and the accompanying legal release speak for themselves. We will not be providing further comment while we cooperate with law enforcement regarding the extortion and financial crimes committed against my client." Carter ended the call. The silence in my office was triumphant. My family had tried to use the media as a weapon to force me into financial submission. They had tried to shame me into handing over the keys to my empire. Instead, I had handed the media the matches and let them set my family's entire fake existence on fire. The narrative was permanently ripped from their control. Chloe could never post another crying video without a million people calling her a fraud in the comments. Beatrice could never show her face at her country club again, knowing every single member had heard her extort her own daughter. And Preston was no longer just an arrogant, failed tech bro. He was a documented criminal whose admission of bank fraud had just been broadcast to federal regulators. I walked over to the large window overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long golden shadows across the skyscrapers. The heavy, suffocating weight of my mother's expectations, of my sister's jealousy, and of my own lingering childhood trauma was completely gone. I had not just survived their attack. I had eradicated their power over me entirely. The iron boundary was permanently forged, and anyone who tried to cross it would meet the exact same fate. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in digital justice. The fallout was faster and more absolute than even Zara had predicted. I arrived at Lumiere the following morning to find a line of people wrapping around the block. They were not angry protesters or internet trolls. They were local business owners, community leaders, and everyday Atlanta residents holding signs of support. When I stepped out of my car, a cheer actually went up from the crowd. Inside the building, the energy was electric. My management team was operating at peak capacity. By 10 o'clock, our reservation servers completely crashed. The technical support team had to migrate our entire booking platform to a higher bandwidth tier just to handle the sheer volume of web traffic. People were not just booking tables for dinner. They were buying thousands of dollars in digital gift cards. They were booking out our private dining rooms for corporate events 6 months in advance. The public had seen a self-made African-American woman standing her ground against an entitled white man who thought he could use corrupt old money connections to destroy her. They saw through Preston's arrogant posturing, and they rallied behind me with their wallets. We secured enough capital in a single afternoon to fund the restaurant's operational costs for an entire year. At 6 o'clock that evening, the local news broadcast turned my family's social standing into ash. I sat in the staff break room with my entire kitchen crew watching the television mounted on the wall. The lead anchor did not hold back or use gentle language. They played Chloe's fake crying video side by side with the raw, high-definition security footage. The contrast was devastating. The news station brought on a behavioral expert who systematically broke down Chloe's manipulative performance, pointing out the forced tears and the calculated pauses. Then the anchor played the audio of Beatrice demanding the $800,000 ransom. My prep cooks cheered loudly as the broadcast dissected the blatant extortion attempt. Julian, my executive chef, leaned against the doorframe and handed me a fresh espresso. He did not say a word, but the respectful nod he gave me spoke volumes. My staff knew I had protected our home. They knew I had gone to war for them. Carter walked into this break room right as the broadcast ended. My corporate attorney looked like a predator who had just finished a perfectly cooked meal. He gestured for me to follow him into my private office away from the cheering kitchen staff. He closed the heavy oak door and dropped his leather briefcase onto the sofa. The authorities took the bait. Carter announced, a sharp, satisfied smile spreading across his face. The Georgia Financial Regulatory Board officially opened a priority investigation into Preston Cole this morning. They do not take kindly to men bragging about defrauding offshore lenders on crystal-clear audio. I sat down behind my desk, taking a slow sip of the espresso. What about the bank holding the collateral on my mother's house? Carter pulled a legal pad from his briefcase. The bank did not even wait for the evening news. They saw the viral posts going around the financial sector this morning. Commercial banks hate public scandals, but they hate unsecured offshore debt even more. They immediately froze all of Preston and Chloe's joint checking and savings accounts pending a massive internal fraud investigation. Preston's credit cards were declined at a gas station 3 hours ago. He has absolutely zero access to liquid capital. And the foreclosure, I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. Accelerated. Carter confirmed, tapping his pen against the paper. The bank is moving to seize Beatrice's property with extreme prejudice. They realize the collateral was secured under fraudulent pretenses, and they want to liquidate the asset before the federal government steps in to seize Preston's remaining estate. Your mother has less than 30 days before the sheriff arrives to change the locks. Zara knocked twice and stepped into the office, her tablet glowing brightly in her hand. She looked exhausted but completely exhilarated. She had been managing the media storm all day, and she was winning every single battle. I have the social updates on Beatrice and Chloe. Zara reported, taking a seat next to Carter. The fallout in their social circle is absolute. Beatrice was officially asked to step down from the board of her prestigious country club an hour ago. The other wealthy matriarchs want absolutely nothing to do with a woman caught on tape extorting her own daughter to cover up her son-in-law's federal crimes. Her friends have completely stopped returning her calls. The social exile is permanent, Maya. She is a pariah. I absorbed the information, processing the sheer speed of their destruction. Beatrice had spent her entire adult life worshipping at the altar of high society. She had sacrificed my childhood and my mental health just to maintain the illusion of elite status. Now that illusion was entirely shattered. She was being cast out of the very circles she had sold her soul to impress. Chloe is faring even worse. Zara continued swiping across her tablet screen. Her influencer sponsors dropped her by noon. Every single brand partnership she had secured has publicly severed ties, citing morality clauses in their contracts. Her comments section is a wasteland of people calling her a fraud and a criminal. She tried to post a written apology claiming she was confused and stressed, but the internet completely rejected it. She had to deactivate all her social media accounts just to stop the flood of death threats and mockery. They built their entire lives on a foundation of lies, I said, looking out the window at the darkening Atlanta sky. They thought their privilege made them bulletproof. They forgot that the truth is a highly destructive weapon when wielded by someone who has absolutely nothing left to lose. Carter leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The district attorney's office reached out to me directly, Maya. They are formally requesting the original uncompressed video files and the raw audio of the voicemail. They are looking at pressing criminal charges for extortion and attempted grand larceny against all three of them. They want to know if you are willing to testify in open court. I turned away from the window and looked directly at my attorney. I felt no pity for the people who shared my bloodline. They had tried to bankrupt me. They had tried to ruin my reputation and steal my livelihood. They had made their choices with absolute clarity and malicious intent. Send the district attorney everything they need. Carter, I instructed, my voice cold and unwavering. Tell them I will happily take the stand. I will swear under oath, and I will watch the judge hand down their sentences. I am not protecting them anymore. Carter nodded, writing a quick note on his legal pad. Consider it done. We will bury them under a mountain of their own evidence. The tide had not just turned. It had transformed into a tsunami that was actively wiping my toxic family off the map. I sat back in my chair, feeling a profound sense of autonomy. My restaurant was thriving. My staff was protected. My brand was universally respected. The people who had tried to drag me back into the dark were drowning in the flood they had created themselves. I took another sip of my espresso, savoring the bitter, rich taste of absolute victory. The next 48 hours were a blur of absolute efficiency in my kitchen and complete devastation in my family's lives. Carter called me early Thursday morning before the morning prep shift had even arrived. He did not bother with a polite greeting. He simply told me to turn on the local news and watch the monitors. I walked into my office and switched on the television. State investigators had officially raided Preston's corporate office space in Midtown Atlanta. It was a spectacular display of law enforcement operating at peak efficiency. The Georgia Financial Regulatory Board had coordinated with local authorities to execute a no-knock warrant. I watched the live helicopter footage showing police cruisers blocking the entrance to his expensive leased office building. Agents in windbreakers were carrying out heavy cardboard boxes filled with hard drives, financial ledgers, and corporate documents. They were loading the physical evidence of his entire fraudulent existence into the back of secure transport vans. Preston's arrogant facade was officially a federal crime scene. The news anchors narrated the raid with grim, serious tones, referencing the viral security footage from my restaurant as the catalyst for the investigation. They detailed how his casual admission of bank fraud on camera had given a judge more than enough probable cause to sign the search warrants. But Preston was nowhere to be found on the broadcast. He was not walking out of the building in handcuffs. He was not standing on the sidewalk watching his empire crumble. The man who had leaned over my white linen tablecloth and threatened to orchestrate a targeted harassment campaign against my business was entirely absent. Carter explained exactly why over the phone. Preston had done what every desperate coward does when the walls start closing in. He panicked and he ran. But he did not leave empty-handed. While the major commercial banks had frozen Preston and Chloe's primary joint checking and savings accounts, Carter's investigative team discovered a massive fatal oversight on my sister's part. Just 3 weeks prior, Preston had convinced Chloe to open a secondary line of credit and a corporate holding account under her own personal name. He had spun her a lie about tax loopholes and protecting their assets from capital gains. Chloe, blinded by her absolute devotion to a man who bought her designer bags and promised her the world, had signed the paperwork without reading a single page. It was the exact same manipulative tactic he had used on Beatrice to steal her house. That secondary account was Preston's emergency escape hatch. Before the state investigators could locate and freeze those specific personal assets, Preston made his final move. He woke up before dawn while Chloe was still sleeping off the exhaustion of her public humiliation. He did not wake her up. He did not say goodbye. He logged into the banking portal and systematically drained every single dollar from the account she had opened for him. He maxed out the remaining credit limits, withdrawing the absolute maximum amount of daily cash allowed. He packed a single duffel bag with his most expensive watches and suits, walked out to his leased sports car, and vanished across state lines. He completely abandoned his wife, leaving her to face the full wrath of the federal government and the local media alone. Chloe woke up in her sprawling suburban mansion to find her husband's closet completely empty and her personal bank balances in the deep negative. She was holding the bag for a massive pile of debt, a criminal investigation, and a ruined public image. The golden child had finally been discarded by the very man she had worshipped. While Chloe was discovering her husband's ultimate betrayal, Beatrice was dealing with her own terrifying reality. The commercial bank holding the fraudulent collateral on her historic estate did not wait for the dust to settle. They saw the news reports. They saw the viral videos of Preston admitting to the offshore loan scheme. They knew the federal government was about to seize Preston's remaining assets as criminal evidence, and they wanted their money first. I heard the details of what happened next from a longtime vendor of mine who happened to be making a delivery in Beatrice's exclusive neighborhood. At exactly noon, a county process server, accompanied by 2 armed sheriff deputies, pulled up to Beatrice's pristine, manicured lawn. They did not park discreetly in the driveway. They left their marked cruisers right on the street for the entire neighborhood to see. They marched up the wide brick steps to the grand double doors of the home she had proudly occupied for 30 years. Beatrice was forced to open her door and face the officers in broad daylight. She was handed a thick stack of bright-colored legal documents. It was the official notice of foreclosure and the formal eviction mandate. The legal paperwork gave her exactly 30 days to pack up her entire life and vacate the premises. If she remained on the property after 30 days, the sheriff would return to physically remove her and place her belongings on the curb. The humiliation was absolute and inescapable. Beatrice tried to maintain her composure. She tried to smile at the deputies and act like there had simply been a terrible administrative banking error. But her neighbors were watching the entire spectacle from their driveways and front windows. The wealthy women who used to drink mimosas on her patio. The country club wives she had desperately tried to impress her entire life were now standing on their lawns, witnessing her eviction. They were texting each other, sharing the news of her downfall in real time. Beatrice had sold her soul and my future to buy a seat at the elite table. She had enabled my sister's vanity and allowed a con artist to destroy her financial security just to keep up appearances. Now the table was gone, the illusion was shattered, and she was being thrown out into the street. Her social exile was completely finalized by the heavy thud of the process server's boots walking away from her porch. I stood in my test kitchen holding my phone to my ear as Carter relayed the final confirmation of the foreclosure notice. I was precisely slicing an heirloom tomato with a Japanese chef knife. The blade glided through the vibrant red flesh with perfect, effortless control. I did not feel a single shred of pity for my mother or my sister. I felt the profound, weightless sensation of pure justice taking its natural, unrelenting course. They had walked into my restaurant and demanded that I save them from the consequences of their own greed. They had expected me to drain my life savings to cover their crimes and fund their delusions. They had threatened to destroy my livelihood when I refused to be their financial hostage. Instead of paying their ransom, I had handed them a mirror. I had exposed them to the sunlight and let the world see exactly what they were. Chloe was now completely broke, universally despised on the internet, and married to a fugitive who had robbed her blind. Beatrice was a total social pariah, counting down the days until she was officially homeless. The safety net they had always relied upon, the deep-rooted expectation that someone else would step in and fix their messes, had been permanently shredded to pieces. They had burned every bridge and alienated every ally. They had absolutely nowhere left to turn and no money left to hide behind. I wiped down my cutting board and set my knife aside. I knew human nature, and I knew the psychology of desperate narcissistic people. They had exhausted all their options and hit rock bottom, which meant I knew exactly who would be showing up at my restaurant's back door next. Exactly 7 days after the state investigators carried Preston's fraudulent life out of his office in cardboard boxes, the security intercom in my test kitchen buzzed with a sharp double tone. I was standing next to Julian, reviewing the seasonal plating for a pan-seared halibut. David, my head of security, stepped through the swinging double doors. His face was entirely neutral, but his posture was rigid and alert. Someone bypassed the outer delivery gate. David reported, his voice low enough not to carry across the prep stations. My guards intercepted her at the loading dock. She is refusing to leave and demanding to speak with you. She says she is your sister. I set down my tasting spoon. I wiped my hands on a pristine white linen towel. The timing was almost poetic. I knew Chloe would run out of options eventually, but lasting only a week was a testament to her absolute lack of survival skills. I told David to lead the way. We walked down the long, brightly lit hallway, past the walk-in coolers, and out the heavy steel doors to the rear loading dock. The humid Atlanta heat hit me instantly. There, standing between two of my massive security personnel near the industrial dumpsters, was the former golden child of the Bennett family. Chloe was completely unrecognizable. The woman who had sat in my private dining room, dripping in diamonds and mocking my career, was entirely gone. Her designer wardrobe had been replaced by a wrinkled, oversized gray sweatshirt and faded leggings. Her hair was pulled back into a messy knotted bun. Her face was pale, puffy, and completely stripped of the expensive makeup she usually wore like armor. She looked small, exhausted, and utterly broken. When the heavy steel doors clicked shut behind me, Chloe looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and frantic. "Maya, please," Chloe sobbed, taking a sudden step forward before the security guards held out their arms to block her path. "Please tell them to let me go. I need to talk to you. You are the only person who can help me." I did not tell the guards to step back. I stood on the elevated concrete platform of the loading dock, looking down at my younger sister. I kept my expression perfectly blank. "You are trespassing on private commercial property, Chloe," I stated, my voice cutting cleanly through the heavy, humid air. "The front doors are for paying customers. The back doors are for approved vendors. You are neither. State your business quickly, or David will have you arrested for loitering." Chloe let out a loud, gasping cry. She wrapped her arms around her stomach as if she were in physical pain. The performative tears that had always worked so flawlessly on Beatrice were flowing freely now. She was trying to play the victim role she had perfected her entire life. But I was not our mother. I did not care about her crying. "He left me, Maya," Chloe wailed, her voice echoing pitifully off the brick alleyway. "Preston took everything. He woke up in the middle of the night and drained the corporate accounts he made me open. He took my personal savings. He maxed out the emergency credit cards and took my jewelry. I have absolutely nothing left. The federal investigators came to the house yesterday. They took my laptop and my phone. They told me I might be indicted as a co-conspirator because my signature is on the bank fraud documents." I crossed my arms over my tailored chef coat. "You signed legal documents for a con artist without reading them because he bought you expensive purses," I replied coldly. "Ignorance of the law is not a valid legal defense in federal court." "I did not know what he was doing," Chloe pleaded, tears streaming rapidly down her face. "You have to believe me, Maya. I thought we were rich. I thought he was building an empire. I did not know he was stealing from offshore lenders. And now those lenders are calling my friends looking for him. The bank froze all my debit cards. I cannot even afford to buy groceries. I have absolutely nothing to my name." She looked up at me with wide, desperate eyes. She was waiting for the familiar family safety net to catch her. She was waiting for the moment where her tears magically erased her terrible behavior. She genuinely believed that her current suffering canceled out decades of her cruelty. "I need a loan, Maya," Chloe begged, her voice dropping to a pathetic, trembling whisper. "Just $50,000. Just enough to hire a criminal defense attorney to keep me out of federal prison. You have millions. You proved that last week. Please, Maya. I am your sister. You cannot just watch me go to jail." I looked down at the woman who had spent 35 years making sure I felt like a worthless failure. "I watched you sit at my table and laugh while your husband threatened to destroy my business," I reminded her, my tone dangerously quiet. "I watched you loudly justify stealing my $60,000 culinary scholarship to pay for your luxury wedding. You felt absolutely no sisterly guilt when you thought you were ruining me. You only remembered we share blood when your bank accounts hit zero." Chloe shook her head frantically, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her wrinkled sweatshirt. "I was wrong, Maya. I was so stupid and arrogant. I am so incredibly sorry for everything I said. I will do anything to make it up to you. Just please give me a loan." "I do not issue personal loans to high-risk individuals who are currently under federal investigation for bank fraud," I stated flatly. "My financial portfolio is permanently closed to you." The reality of my refusal hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back a step. She realized the tears were not working. She realized the sister card was completely maxed out and rejected. So she pivoted to her final desperate strategy. She decided to perform ultimate humility. "Then give me a job," Chloe cried, stepping closer to the edge of the loading dock platform. "Give me a job in your restaurant, Maya. I will do anything. I will scrub the floors. I will wash dishes in the back. I just need a paycheck to survive. Please, Maya, you cannot let me starve." She stood there looking up at me, expecting her offer to wash dishes to trigger my empathy. She thought that by degrading herself, she would prove how desperate she was. She assumed I would look at my golden child sister offering to do manual labor and immediately write her a large check just to save her from the indignity of hard work. She did not actually want to wash dishes. She wanted a massive financial bailout disguised as a paycheck. She wanted me to pay her to go away. I stared down at her, absorbing the sheer audacity of her request. She had insulted my entire industry just a few days ago. She had mocked the service workers who built my empire. She had called me a nobody for working in a kitchen. And now, facing absolute financial ruin, she wanted to use that same kitchen as her personal life raft. I did not flinch. I did not offer her a single ounce of comfort. I simply turned my head and looked at David. "Keep her exactly where she is," I instructed my head of security. "Do not let her inside the building under any circumstances." "Where are you going?" Chloe panicked as I turned my back to her. "Maya, please do not leave me out here." "I am going to my office, Chloe," I said over my shoulder. "If you want to work in my kitchen, you are going to follow standard corporate procedure. Wait by the dumpsters. I will be right back." I walked back through the heavy steel doors, leaving the suffocating Atlanta heat behind me. The cool air conditioning of the kitchen washed over my face, providing immediate relief. I moved past the prep stations where my culinary team was meticulously dicing vegetables and reducing complex sauces. They operated with absolute precision and focus. They were professionals who had spent years honing their craft. They earned their place in my kitchen through dedication and relentless hard work. I was not going to insult their commitment by handing a privileged, unqualified woman a free pass, just because we happened to share the same parents. I walked up the stairs to the administrative offices. I bypassed my private suite and went directly to the Human Resources Department. The Human Resources manager looked up from her desk, surprised to see me handling paperwork directly. I asked her for a standard entry-level employment application. I specifically requested the form we use for dishwashers and bottom-tier prep cooks. She handed me the crisp white packet of paper attached to a wooden clipboard. I looked down at the blank application. It asked for very basic information: previous work experience, educational background, criminal history, professional references, emergency contacts. The irony was incredibly sharp. Chloe had absolutely nothing to put on these lines. She had never held a real job in her entire life. Beatrice had funded her 20s, and Preston had funded her 30s. Her only defining skill was spending money that did not belong to her. She had no culinary training and no hospitality experience. She was currently under federal investigation for bank fraud. Who would she list as an emergency contact? Her fugitive husband. Her soon-to-be homeless mother. By every single corporate metric, she was a massive liability. I took a blue pen from the desk and clipped it to the application packet. I walked back down the stairs. I took my time. There was no rush. I let Chloe wait outside in the oppressive humidity next to the industrial waste bins. I wanted her to smell the reality of the restaurant business. I wanted her to feel the deep discomfort of being on the outside looking in. When I pushed the loading dock doors open again, Chloe was pacing nervously. She had her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The massive security guards had not moved an inch. They stood like stone statues, ensuring she did not take a single step toward the building. Chloe stopped pacing when she saw me. Her eyes lit up with a sudden, desperate hope. She genuinely thought I had gone upstairs to write her a check. She believed the delay was just me gathering the funds to save her from ruin. I walked to the edge of the elevated concrete platform. I looked down at her and held out the clipboard. "What is this?" Chloe asked, her voice trembling with confusion. She reached up and took the clipboard from my hands. She stared down at the standard application form. "You said you wanted a job, Chloe," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the brick alleyway. "You said you would do anything to survive. That is the standard application for a minimum wage prep cook position. It is the lowest tier job we offer. Fill it out completely. Do not leave any blank spaces. When you are done, you can hand it to David. He will pass it to Human Resources for review." Chloe stared at the paper as if it were written in a foreign language. She looked up at me, her face twisting in sudden indignation. "A prep cook?" she asked, her voice rising in disbelief. "Maya, I cannot be a prep cook. I do not know how to cook. I thought you meant an office job. I thought you would make me a manager or an event coordinator. You know I am good at planning parties." I crossed my arms over my chest. Planning a wedding with stolen scholarship money does not qualify you to run corporate events for a multi-million-dollar hospitality group, I stated coldly. My event coordinators have master degrees and a decade of high-volume industry experience. My managers work 80-hour weeks and know how to balance complex profit and loss statements. You do not even know how to balance a basic checking account. You let a con artist steal your mother's house and drain your credit. You are entirely unqualified for any management position in my company. Chloe's face flushed a deep, angry red. She gripped the clipboard tightly, causing her knuckles to turn white. "But I am your sister Maya. You own the whole company. You can just give me a title. You can just put me on the payroll. I just need the money. You do not even have to make me work the hours. Just pay me an executive salary so I can afford a defense lawyer." The sheer entitlement was breathtaking. Even while standing next to a dumpster facing a federal indictment, she still expected special treatment. She still viewed me as a personal automated teller machine. "I do not run a charity, Chloe," I said, my tone absolute and unyielding. "I run an elite business. I employ highly skilled professionals who rely on me to make sound corporate decisions. Hiring a woman who is currently under active investigation for federal bank fraud is terrible business. Putting you on my payroll would jeopardize my company and insult my staff. I am not going to bypass my professional standards to save you from the consequences of your own greed." "Maya, please," Chloe begged, the anger dissolving back into desperate tears. "I cannot survive on minimum wage. I have massive legal fees. I have absolutely nothing left. You cannot humiliate me like this. You cannot make me wash dishes for a living." "I am not humiliating you, Chloe," I corrected her. "You degraded our profession just last week. You told Preston that working in a kitchen made me a nobody. You laughed at the people who do this work for a living. Now you get to realize that the people you mocked are vastly more qualified and valuable than you are. They earn their paychecks through hard work. You expect yours to be handed to you simply for existing." She stood there, clutching the application to her chest. The tears streamed down her pale, puffy face, but I felt no pity. I felt no obligation to rescue her. She had built a life on arrogance and manipulation, and now she was facing the brutal reality of the real world. "Fill out the application, Chloe," I instructed, my voice devoid of any sisterly affection. "Be honest about your criminal investigations on the background check section. Submit it to Human Resources. They will evaluate you based solely on your merit, just like every other applicant who walks off the street. But let me be perfectly clear. You lack the basic qualifications required for my kitchen. You are a severe liability. I highly doubt you will get a call back for an interview." Chloe looked down at the clipboard. She looked at the blank spaces asking for her work history and her professional references. She realized she had absolutely nothing to write down. She had no one left to call. Her husband had robbed her and fled the state. Her mother was being evicted and was a social outcast. Her social circle had completely ostracized her. She was entirely alone. The last remaining shred of her golden child delusion finally broke. She realized the safety net was permanently destroyed. There would be no secret financial bailout. There would be no fake management job created just to save her pride. I was treating her exactly like a stranger applying off the street because, to me, that is exactly what she was. Chloe slowly lowered the clipboard. Her shoulders slumped forward in complete and total defeat. She did not argue anymore. She did not scream or throw a tantrum. She simply handed the blank application and the pen back to David, who took it without a single word. She looked at me one last time. There was no hatred left in her eyes, just the hollow, empty stare of someone who had lost absolutely everything. She turned around and began to walk away down the brick alleyway. She dragged her feet, moving slowly through the oppressive Atlanta heat. I watched her figure grow smaller and smaller as she walked toward the busy street with nowhere to go and no one to save her. I turned around and walked back into my restaurant, letting the heavy steel doors lock securely behind me. The week that followed Chloe's disastrous appearance at my loading dock was the most profitable period in my company's history. The public support translated into sustained financial momentum. We broke every internal revenue record. But while my empire solidified its foundation, the remnants of my biological family were experiencing their final inevitable collapse. I left the restaurant late on a Thursday night. The humid Atlanta air was heavy with the threat of an impending thunderstorm. I drove my car toward my private luxury condominium building in Midtown. It was an exclusive high-rise with 24-hour armed security and biometric access gates. It was a fortress designed to keep the chaos of the city entirely at bay. As I approached the illuminated entrance, I slowed my vehicle. Standing on the wet concrete just outside the perimeter of the security gate was a solitary figure. It was Beatrice. I put the car in park and watched her through the windshield. The transformation was jarring. The formidable high society matriarch who had commanded the private dining room at Lumiere was completely gone. She was not wearing a tailored silk blouse or a designer jacket. She wore a wrinkled beige cardigan and dark slacks. Her perfectly highlighted hair was flat and unstyled. At her feet rested two large designer suitcases, the only physical remnants of the wealthy aesthetic she had sold her soul to maintain. One of my building's security guards stepped out of the guardhouse, his hand resting on his radio. He recognized my car and immediately moved to intercept the woman loitering near the gate. I rolled down my window and raised my hand, signaling him to stop. I put the car in park and stepped out onto the damp pavement. I needed to finish this myself. There could be absolutely no loose threads. Beatrice turned her head when she heard my car door close. Her eyes were sunken and surrounded by dark, heavy shadows. When she saw me, a flash of desperate relief washed over her face. She took a step toward the security line, dragging one of her heavy suitcases behind her. Maya Beatrice cried out, her voice cracking in the quiet night air. "Thank God you are here. I have been waiting for hours. The security guards would not let me into the lobby. They told me I was not on your approved guest list." "You are not on the guest list, Beatrice," I stated plainly. I stopped a few feet away, keeping a safe, deliberate distance between us. "You are trespassing on private property. What are you doing here?" Beatrice let go of the suitcase and pressed both hands to her chest. The tears began to flow instantly. It was the exact same performative weeping Chloe had attempted behind my restaurant. They shared the same playbook because they shared the same delusion. They locked me out. Maya. Beatrice sobbed. The sheriff came to the house this morning. They put a padlock on the front door and they taped an eviction notice to the windows. They barely gave me an hour to pack my things. I had to leave everything behind. The antique furniture, the artwork, my entire life is just sitting in there waiting to be auctioned off to pay for Preston's crimes. I looked at the two suitcases sitting on the wet pavement. You should have packed lighter, I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. I suggest you call your country club friends. I am sure one of the wealthy women you spent 30 years trying to impress has a guest house you can borrow. They will not answer my calls, Beatrice wailed, shaking her head frantically. Nobody will talk to me. They saw the news. They saw the videos. They treated me like I was carrying a disease. I have nowhere else to go, Maya. Chloe is staying in some cheap motel off the highway, and she will not even tell me where she is. She blames me for introducing her to Preston. My own daughter blames me for her ruined life. Your daughter is finally telling the truth, I noted coldly. You raised her to value money over character, and she married a fraud because he fit your aesthetic requirements. You built that monster, Beatrice. Now you get to live in the cage with it. Beatrice took another step forward, reaching her hand out toward me. Maya, please. I am your mother. I gave you life. I carried you in my body. You have a penthouse in this building. I know you have extra bedrooms. I just need a place to stay until I can figure out my next move. I just need a bed for a few weeks. You cannot leave your own flesh and blood standing out here on the street. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the woman who had spent 35 years actively trying to destroy my self-worth. Giving birth is a biological function, Beatrice. I said, my words slicing through the heavy, humid air like a scalpel. Being a mother requires actually loving and protecting the child you produce. You did neither of those things. You weaponized my existence to make yourself feel superior. You stole my culinary scholarship to buy a party for Chloe. You tried to extort my business to save your social status. You never treated me like your flesh and blood. You treated me like a bank account you forgot the PIN code to. Beatrice dropped her hand, her tears giving way to a sudden, desperate anger. How can you be so incredibly heartless? She screamed, her voice echoing down the empty street. I am a 60-year-old woman. I am going to be homeless. Does that mean absolutely nothing to you? Do you have no conscience at all? My conscience is perfectly clear, I replied. I offered you a relationship for 3 decades, and you rejected it every single time because I was not the golden child. I worked myself to the bone to build an empire, and you tried to burn it down. You made your choices, Beatrice. You chose vanity over integrity. You chose the illusion of wealth over the reality of your family. But I am your family, Beatrice pleaded, sobbing uncontrollably now. No, I said, my voice dropping to a low, absolute register. I am not your family. You did not raise a daughter, Beatrice. You raised an automated teller machine for your golden child and your fraudulent son-in-law. You spent your entire life trying to withdraw funds from a machine that you constantly kicked and abused. And now you are standing on the pavement realizing the screen is blank. The machine is broken. The automated teller machine is permanently closed. Beatrice stared at me, her face twisted in pure agony and realization. She finally understood that there was no hidden reserve of daughterly affection left to exploit. I had completely emptied the vault of my empathy. There was nothing left but cold, hard reality. I turned to the security guard standing by the gate. If this woman attempts to bypass the perimeter, call the police and have her arrested for trespassing, I instructed clearly. She is permanently banned from this property. Understood, Ms. Bennett, the guard replied, stepping squarely in front of the access panel. Maya, do not do this, Beatrice screamed, falling to her knees on the damp concrete. Please do not walk away from me. I am your mother. I turned my back on her. I walked to my car, opened the door, and slid into the driver's seat. I started the engine, and the heavy security gates slowly began to roll open. I drove my vehicle through the entrance, pulling into the brightly lit, secure parking garage of my building. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I did not watch her crying on the pavement. I left her exactly where she belonged on the outside of my life, permanently locked out of the empire she had tried so desperately to destroy. The heavy iron gates of my condominium complex rolled shut with a loud, definitive metallic clang. I watched Beatrice through the rearview mirror as my car descended into the secure underground parking garage. She was still kneeling on the damp pavement, clutching her designer luggage, looking absolutely shattered. I had established the final unbreakable boundary. I had looked her directly in the eyes and informed her that she did not raise a daughter. She had raised a financial safety net for her golden child, and that safety net had been permanently dismantled. I parked my car in my private designated spot. The concrete walls of the underground garage felt like a fortress. For 35 years, I had been conditioned to rush to my mother's side the moment she shed a single tear. I had been deeply programmed to absorb her failures, finance her illusions, and apologize for simply existing. But that toxic programming was completely overwritten. I stepped out of my car and walked to the private elevator. The biometric scanner read my fingerprint, and the steel doors slid open. I rode up to my penthouse in absolute silence. I did not pour a drink to calm my nerves. I did not pace the hardwood floors agonizing over my decision. I went into my bedroom, washed my face, and went to sleep. It was the deepest, most restorative sleep I had ever experienced in my entire life. 6 months passed. The seasons changed in Atlanta, and the turbulent dust from my family's catastrophic collapse finally settled into a cold, hard reality. The federal justice system moves slowly, but it moves with absolute crushing certainty when bank fraud is involved. Preston was apprehended 3 states away, trying to board a private charter flight with a duffel bag full of stolen cash and fabricated corporate documents. He was currently sitting in a federal holding facility, awaiting a sentencing hearing that would likely put him behind bars for a decade. The arrogant tech bro who had leaned across my white linen tablecloth and threatened to destroy my business was now wearing a government-issued uniform and eating off a plastic tray. His elite political connections completely vanished the second the federal indictments were unsealed. Chloe learned the brutal, unvarnished reality of living without a financial host. Stripped of her stolen wealth and abandoned by her fraudulent husband, she was forced to face the real world with absolutely zero marketable skills. The last I heard from my legal team, she was working a minimum wage retail job at a discount department store in the deep suburbs. She spent her days folding clearance sweaters and dealing with angry customers. Her expansive designer wardrobe was sold off piece by piece just to pay her bankruptcy lawyers. The golden child was finally learning the true heavy value of a dollar earned through actual manual labor. As for Beatrice, the commercial bank executed the foreclosure with extreme prejudice. They auctioned her historic estate to a corporate real estate developer who immediately gutted the property. Beatrice was forced to move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood she used to mock relentlessly. Her country club friends completely abandoned her. Her phone stopped ringing. She was entirely exiled from the high society circles she had worshipped. She had sacrificed her own daughter to buy a seat at the elite table, and now she was eating dinner alone in the dark. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt for any of them. I was too busy building my empire. It was a Tuesday morning, and the ambient noise of my test kitchen at Lumiere was a symphony of perfectly orchestrated chaos. The stainless steel countertops gleamed brilliantly under the bright industrial lights. The heavy, rich scent of roasted garlic, seared Wagyu beef, and clarified butter filled the air. This kitchen was my sanctuary. This was the beautiful structured world I had built with my own 2 hands. Julian, my executive chef, stood next to me at the primary prep station. He was meticulously plating a new seasonal dish using a pair of culinary tweezers. Zara, my public relations director, was sitting on a stainless steel stool nearby, reviewing our spectacular quarterly profit margins on her tablet. Carter, my corporate attorney, had just sent over the finalized commercial acquisition papers for a second restaurant location across town. David, My head of security stood by the heavy kitchen doors, keeping a watchful, protective eye on the perimeter. I looked around the room at the people who populated my daily life. They were my staff, my colleagues, and my protectors, but much more importantly, they were my chosen family. We did not share blood, but we shared profound mutual respect. We did not use emotional manipulation or financial extortion to communicate with each other. We operated entirely on a foundation of trust, integrity, and relentless hard work. They respected the hospitality empire I built, and I deeply respected the immense talent they brought to my tables every single night. They were fiercely loyal because I earned their loyalty, not because I demanded it through toxic familial obligation. Julian stepped back from the prep station. He wiped his hands on a pristine white towel and gestured toward the plate. It was a pan-seared Chilean sea bass resting on a bed of sweet corn puree, garnished with microgreens and a dark reduction of aged balsamic. I picked up a silver tasting fork. The entire kitchen went quiet, waiting for my verdict. I took a small, precise bite. The flavors exploded beautifully on my palate. The sear on the fish was incredibly crisp. The meat was buttery and delicate. The sharp acidity of the balsamic perfectly balanced the natural sweetness of the corn puree. It was absolutely flawless. I looked at Julian and gave him a single sharp nod of approval. A massive, proud smile broke across his face, and the kitchen immediately erupted back into its productive, rhythmic hum. I set the silver fork down and walked out through the swinging doors into the empty main dining room. The morning sunlight streamed brightly through the massive front windows, illuminating the crystal glasses and the crisp white tablecloths. I thought back to the night my family sat at one of these exact tables and tried to break my spirit. They had called me a failure. They had called me a disappointment. They told me I could not afford to be in a room like this. I looked around my multi-million-dollar establishment. I had survived their cruelty and I had neutralized their threats. I was completely free. I was entirely autonomous. I was untouchable. And the absolute sweetest revenge was simply outgrowing the people who tried to bury me. The most profound lesson from my journey is that you can never heal in the same environment that broke you. Toxic family members will exploit your loyalty and weaponize your success to fund their own delusions. True empowerment comes from recognizing that shared blood does not equal a shared moral compass. When people demand that you sacrifice your empire to save them from the consequences of their own arrogance and greed, your greatest defense is an unbreakable boundary. The sweetest revenge is not destruction. It is completely outgrowing the people who tried to bury you and thriving in the light. If you have ever had to build an iron boundary to protect your peace from a toxic family, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your story in the comments below.